to see who from the commission is out there.
It looks like we have Bob Carey online and Melissa. Is that the full list there, Hannah? Dr. Bob. Great.
And we are broadcasting to the public. Just
Yes.
good to remind ourselves when we're here in person that anybody could be listening.
Go ahead, Linda.
Good afternoon, everybody. It really is great to see you all in person. I myself am grateful for a really beautiful drive today, since it's quite the commute from Deer Isle, and I hope all of you got here safely and happily as well as we watch spring come to us. But because this is our next to our last meeting, it really is good to be in the same room. We have some important work to do today, and I always think that work is done much better when we're face to face, where we can read each other's reactions, and hopefully everybody gets their voice really well heard. You know, the truth is, we've come a long, long way in 11 months, a really long way. And our political climate has come a long way at the same time. This could be our, last commission meeting before release. We're certainly hopeful it is. At the same time, we want to hear everybody's comments on this draft. It needs to be as good as possible. Things can be as wonky as they are in Washington, and let's be honest and set the tone correctly. Things are very wonky in Washington, and every day the news kind of gets worse, or as we say, worser and worser. Okay. And it's going to affect us, and it's going to affect our plan. And we need to look at it through that lens. We can't be in denial about that. I was just working with some smaller nonprofits who want to just pretend this is all going to go away. It's not going to go away. And the smarter we can be about it, the more effective we can be. And I think one of the things it's important for us to acknowledge is that a lot of this is happening because a lot of people in this country believe that government doesn't work for them. And I know that Dan and I are in agreement when we talk about this plan being actionable, that what we mean is that we want to prove with this commission that the government can work for us. It can work for our communities. And we have some real work to do to prove that, right? We need to really make this actionable, and then we're going to have to figure out now under new circumstances how those actions are possible and how we're going to make them happen at state and local levels. And look, we've raised almost $200 million to date, right? Some of that may be here, some of it may not be here, but it really is more important than ever. So I thank you again all for your commitment. I want to say how much I'm missing Dan today and how much he's missing being here. He's had lots of, input behind the scenes. He's weighed in on the draft. He's really, really happy with the draft and with the direction this is going, as am I, in terms of how well GoPIF staff, and I want to just take hats off to Brian and Hannah and to the entire GoPIF staff for really taking all of the work of those work groups, which was a lot, okay? All of those notes and being able to refine them down and to get all the actions in here so that it is truly actionable. And speaking of actions, do you want to deliver the breaking news, Hannah? I think it's yours to deliver.
Sure. Well, speaking of actions, the House and Senate today are in the process of finally passing LD1. And they haven't completed it yet, but they each took initial votes this morning and they're still in session apparently. So there's a possibility it will be enacted today. So that's big news.
Yay.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, applause. I mean, that's really. The momentum of LD1 is because of this commission. And let's not forget that one of the things it does is it establishes by statute the State Resilience Office. Okay, the funding for that, we're gonna have to find it, right? It's gonna establish it by statute if we have not already got it. So I said this in the email that some of you may or may not have read, just a reminder email about today, but I want us all to be thinking with our comments today of a couple things. This is your opportunity to speak up. This is it. This is the time. Because at the May meeting, hopefully we're delivering this. And as we think about it today, and we're thinking about action, and we're thinking about making government work, What is the first thing we're asking the governor to do? What's the first thing we're doing? What is the first thing, right? What is the first step of this plan? So in order to get there, we're gonna start with a quick scan of the big picture, which is constantly changing. Hannah's going to recap areas of progress, a lot of which we've been hearing about over the past few months and that we should be proud of for GoPIF, for the state, for ourselves. And then I'll take us back to our conversations about what success, how we define success as a commission. And Brian's going to summarize then the draft plan that you all received early this week. And I hope you've all had a chance to look at it. If you need a paper copy, they're here. So you can have one in front of you if you want. So we're going to have two discussions. In the first discussion, we're going to ask for your feedback on the draft. What did we get right? And what needs to be changed? What needs work still? And then the second discussion, we're going to focus on implementation and filling in those important details that we haven't arrived at yet in terms of tracking and accountability, reporting progress, communicating the plan to all of our constituencies. Okay, we got to get some details in there about that. We need plans for that. So, as I said, our goal is at the end of today's meeting to pop open the champagne corks now. I'm sorry. So the final instructions for the staff. And hopefully we've been giving them really clear, specific stuff, and hopefully we'll do that at the end of today so that their job is as easy as possible and we can have a completed plan ready for public release at our May meeting. Sound good?
Great.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah.
Well, I first just want to make sure everyone saw the snacks, by the way.
Very important,
Thank
big
you,
picture.
team, for bringing coffee and healthy snacks and unhealthy snacks. So if you need it, please stand up and get it at any time. I just want to also thank Linda and Dan, who's not here, but they have been putting in a lot of time helping the staff and our team think through this report and how we make it actionable. And this really is the chance for everyone else to weigh in. And some of you have been doing that, but we look forward to this conversation. I do just really want to also, again, call out Brian, but also Dan, Hannah, Sarah, the other Hannah, not me. Hannah over there, Sarah, some of Dan's staff and the MEMA staff. This report it's a heavy lift to sort of turn these things out quickly, and they've been working hard on it. That being said, I'm thanking them now. We can thank them again, but they put in a lot of work to crank this out quickly. So I'm gonna just remind us of the momentum. I feel like I did a little bit of this last time, but you heard the breaking news. Bob Carey is out there as well. Bob Carey probably just spent more hours in the Housing and Economic Development Committee than he was hoping to, working on LD1. But we have gotten that almost over the finish line, and it is a big deal in that it's a $39 million down payment on a variety of resilience activities, as you all know, for homeowners, for MEMA, for communications, and funding our current and open disasters and future ones, as well as the State Resilience Office and the Flood Ready Maine program. So that's a big deal. And, we'll get a little bit more talking about federal funding, but I'm feeling increasingly grateful for this other special revenue funding that Bob Carey's office had and the ability to secure that for this work. And some of that funding is going to be work that happens over multiple years. So I don't want to count all the chickens, but we're getting very close to passing that bill. Billy Bob Fockingham, the Republican leader in the House, was especially helpful in supporting that with Maddie Daughtry, the Senate president. And so, you hear a lot of bad things happening right now about the parties, whether they get along. So the fact that both sides of the aisle saw this as an early priority, they made it LD1, they supported the governor's bill. I do think that sets a really good tone for the work that we're all trying to do. So just a reminder of the other things we have going on. The $69 million NOAA grant is underway. Our office is looking to award a number of the Community Resilience Partnership grants in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be awarding the first batch of that $69 million. State agencies, some of our partners across the state are all starting to implement the NOAA grant. So that's good news. Just taking my Maalox or whatever it is you're supposed to take for your heartburn of spending federal money right now. The Maine Office of Community Affairs, I know as you've all heard, is up and running. State Resilience Office gets created in statute with LD1 going into MOCA. MOCA is a part of the budget that's still being debated. Again, lot happening. I will say we've seen really good bipartisan support for that work, even though the state budget itself is a little bit rocky. And, you know, we can talk probably quite a bit about the number of state, regional, and local actions happening. I know we're going to talk more about permitting today. We're going to talk about the continued work we all need to do, but I'm sitting next to Rob in the DEP, and there's a lot of activity happening in rulemaking, happening in the legislative session around how we make projects happen, how we fund projects, how at the regional level we make these things happen. So we feel a lot of positive momentum about where we are. I just want to kind of shift to, we do have this heartburn about what's happening at the federal level. And I might even ask, I'll maybe call out Ann Fuchs from MEMA, who's been sort of most in the crosshairs of some recent federal grant cancellations. But we are feeling as a state, there's a lot of funds that have been awarded to Maine. There are projects underway. There's shovels in the ground. There's things being planned. They're happening. There are obligated funds that have been contracted. So that is normally a time of kind of confidence, but simultaneously Maine has seen grants being canceled. We know that there are a lot of conversations at the federal level about what's happening to emergency management more broadly. Charlie called out a news article a couple weeks ago saying, you know, there have been proposals to eliminate FEMA, to sort of hand off all responsibility to the states for rebuilding after storms. That's sort of the most dire case. I can't politically believe that would happen. But I think that the kind of significant uncertainty at the federal level does make us think about our work, our state plans, the importance of this work like today and on an ongoing basis. Because that kind of instability, we're still gonna get storms in Maine. We're still gonna get rain events. Jay is still gonna have, you know, washed out roads, and Stonington is gonna have working waterfronts that need to be rebuilt, and DOT Joyce is gonna have lots of things to worry about. And we're gonna have to figure out how to deal with those things. And so I would say our work is coming at a exciting and yet very challenging time. So that I think makes me feel like we gotta make sure we get this right. And I think the staff team has tried to reflect that challenge in this document, but I think it's important for all of us as we have the conversations about how we ensure that we're making progress, how we think about that. So I don't know, Annie, if you want to just say a little bit about, it's not breaking news today, but the news around the changes in FEMA, especially for sort of the hazard mitigation work, are challenging, and they're not all bad, but they're challenging.
Sure. So there's a lot in the world of emergency management, but I'll just focus on the grant programs right now. So we did find out on Friday, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program, BRIC, is no longer to be. They are sunsetting this grant. It's a grant that came to fruition in the Trump administration, and it's closing down in the Trump administration. So we found out Friday via a FEMA press release, very high level, very vague. We've had a lot of questions and been going back and forth with our federal counterparts who are also seeking answers. What we do know is BRIC fiscal year 24, the notice of funding opportunity was pulled, and it will not be re-advertised again. So that one's no longer. And then BRIC fiscal year 20 to 23, any grants that were not obligated or awarded to the state of Maine will not be moving to award. So they've been pulled from consideration. So fortunately for us, for BRIC 20 to 23, that left 3 applicants from BRIC fiscal year 23. We were able to move to different grant programs. We have the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP, and Flood Mitigation Assistance, FMA, still available. So for BRIC fiscal year 24, it was leaning into being a really good year for us. We had about 49 million ready to submit for consideration. That's about 18 applicants. We're kind of doing our best right now to maneuver to other grant programs that remain available, either flood mitigation assistance, hazard mitigation grant program, or congressionally directed spending. So fortunately, we have some other options, but the BRIC program being taken away from states and municipalities across the nation is a pretty big blow. It was a pretty successful program, no matter what headlines say about it. So it will be a big loss, especially for us and our initiatives, but we do have other programs at least that we can offer. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Annie?
One quick question. My understanding is that means that the regional code enforcement project is dead. Is that correct?
Anything involving building codes is unfortunately, unless it's already been awarded, doesn't likely have a future within the mitigation grant spectrum through FEMA, unfortunately. Yeah, that'll be one of the casualties.
Yep, and there is a list we could, I don't know if you're sharing that list, but it does include sort of who has to look elsewhere.
That's correct.
It is a combination of communities and some state projects and regional projects.
Judy, has that one been awarded?
They didn't have it, no.
Okay, yeah. So unfortunately, that one won't be moving forward.
Can you tell us roughly how much they're losing?
Pardon?
Can you tell us roughly how much we're losing?
I can pull that information actually while we're in this meeting. Yeah, because I have it on the side, but I just have to kind of look into it a little bit and pull it up.
Great, and we understand that the Trump administration is taking a closer look at NOAA right now. So it's an anxiety point for all of us. So I will pass it back to Linda. I do just want to note that Sam Brody is here in real life. He has been here with us once before. He just was looking for an excuse to get out of Texas, I think, but,
It's already summer there. So
yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you with us, Sam. And I don't think you're formally on the agenda, but I would encourage all of us to direct questions to Sam as they come up, since we have him right here in the room with us, and make sure that we get his wisdom on
Can I-
many things.
Could I just ask him to say, like, what is the vibe among people doing this kind of work nationally?
Panic, despair. The other thing that happened yesterday is the government canceled all the Department of Homeland Security Centers of Excellence dealing with disasters. The BRIC cancellation is entirely political. The only reason I know all this stuff is because one of my 80 bosses is NIM kid who was being considered for FEMA director, and he pulled out. So he is an open book. There's not appetite to touch FEMA mitigation money, but other stuff's on the table. They do want to dismantle FEMA, but there's also a big push to, so they take away BRIC, but then they're gonna roll out some brand new shiny program, which is like BRIC. So first will be the decimation of these programs, and then they want to have a Trump-esque brand on new programs. So I think that isn't all bad news. Even so, the states are gonna have more responsibility to deal with their own disasters. People around me are doing desperate pushes to say, okay, fine, but give us the resources to do it. Maine's really well positioned, just having this plan. If you have to take care of your own house, you have a plan. Most states don't have a statewide plan or resilience office that's so consolidated. So I get a lot of panicked people. I mean, academics, people are running around with their hair on fire. And also in the state level too. It's trickling down to the states. And that's a real concern, but and who knows what's gonna happen, but they want to rebrand FEMA in a lot of ways. So that doesn't necessarily mean completely taking away everything, but I don't even know what that means, a Trump brand, but I see casinos in my mind.
Large gold letters
Right.
generally.
It's we get I get a lot of people saying, well, we'll just do what we're gonna do. We can't control it. And I think that's wrong. As you mentioned, I think it's a whole new landscape. It's a different ecosystem moving forward. And the other good news is generally there's a swing one direction, there's a counter swing equally in the other direction. So in 2 years, who knows? That's my standard line.
So Linda, I would just say, it's not just environmental. I mean, we had a very kind of sad conversation with Federal Highway yesterday. More than half the people are gone now in the Maine division. And quote, the bloodbath hasn't happened yet. So, I mean, it's everyone. I don't think it's just the environmental agencies. Federal Highway got doged and got hit pretty hard. So they're reeling right now. So we're trying to figure out that landscape and what that looks like. So I would just say, it feels targeted, but I think it's just across government.
And that's the amazing thing. I mean, honestly, because you think about highways, I mean, you would think highways would be kind of like LD1, kind of a bipartisan issue, right? I mean, highways all over the country, every state. So, yeah, I mean, they're laying people off at the Maine State Library as of yesterday, huge numbers of their staff. And it's really across everything. And it's interesting what you're saying, Sam, about the rebrand, because what we're seeing all the time are these actions and then the pullback of the action, essentially. So if we put the money back and we put it back in a slightly different way, and we can say there are no fraudsters there anymore in the new money, does it come back and how quickly does it come back? But I think above all, in our plan, we have to have some actions that we know we can control and can fund so that we have some wins, just like LD1. I think that's what's so vital about that piece of legislation. And again, thanks to Bob and to all of you who have worked on that, because that's a big win. That's a big win. And can we do another win like that? And can we slow down the sequence? Because that's what we're going to have to do, and not just feel like it's done, not just feel like it's dead, but slow it down. So, I know within that context, I just want to remind us what we said success looked like in our conversations from June and November of last year, before we knew any of this environment. But for most of us, I think the most important outcome, and I certainly speak for Dan and for myself, we wanted to be pragmatic, actionable, and responding to urgency, to a sense of urgency. We all felt it last summer, for better or worse. Hopefully for better. We didn't have any serious storms this winter. So we didn't get direct hands-on experience with destruction. People didn't have that experience. And you know how everybody is, how people are, like, oh, it's over a year ago now. Like, what do we remember of that? So it's our job, I think, to really make sure that people know that the cost of inaction is so much more than the cost of action, right? So we have to put those facts out there, that the cost of inaction is huge compared to what happens when we have to rebuild in the face of disaster. So we committed to producing a plan that was achievable and with specified timelines, which what I'm suggesting is that timeline may be stretched out now, right? If we're really being actionable and direct. We said that we would maximize available funding sources, and that has a new flavor to it, but it doesn't mean that's gone either. I mean, it may mean that we lean even more heavily into our public-private partnership with philanthropy, right? That we recognize short-term goals are more dependent on the private sector, and how do we access those funds in an equitable way? And how do we create some equity around this? Use it as an opportunity to create equity in the state by our work with philanthropy. I mean, that's an opportunity. So, and we also held ourselves to be responsive to what we heard from our communities and our constituencies. And, now we're hearing that their hair is on fire for the most part. So now we're out there with fire extinguishers, right? So how do we make the plan a fire extinguisher? So we want to highlight success. We want to inspire action. And like I said, I really think that in some ways, and LD1, again, a great example of this. Our best opportunity here is to show people how government can work. It really is. People think it's broken, like, let's prove that it's not. Let's prove we can make things happen. So keep those goals in mind with your comments, please. And let's get to it, Brian.
Well, thank you all for all of the input that you've given over the last couple of months. And for those of you who've already sent comments on the draft that we just sent out on Sunday evening, thank you for sending those along. Those will all get incorporated after the conversation today and the input that we gather from you today so that we can take your instructions back and make the final edits to the report. So as Linda said, we can come to that May meeting with a final, hopefully printed and glossy version of it for you. I'm going to do a quick overview of the draft that you have in front of you. If anybody needs a printed copy, they're here on the table and we can pass them around if you'd like it. So just put your hand up and we can get you one. And I think, from the top, I think you'll notice that there's some material that has been spruced up and updated since the November report. Some of the content may look a little familiar to you, but we have definitely updated it with what we've heard from you, and we've updated it with some considerations for how the landscape around us has changed as well. It layers in the context and the depth that you all brought to the small group discussions over the past couple of months and the meeting that we had last month. So thank you for your additions of all of that. We tried to bring in more prioritization and sequencing as you requested, given the detail that we heard from you, and then try to match that up with some of the resources that we know are available for the activities. And then we updated the key messages. So if you'll remember, that section from the November report had a number of key messages. We've updated those, again, based on what we've heard from you and what the landscape around us looks like. And so urgency is still the top line in those key messages. And I think newly, Maine must become more active, more capable, and more self-resourced in all of this work. As Linda said, proactive investments are more cost-effective than rebuilding or the recovery process in many measurements by a factor of 13, which is really exciting and something that we need to lean into the communications about. And as Hannah said, that there has been a lot of momentum. There's actually been a lot of investment in Maine over the past couple of years. And part of the work that we've done over the last couple of months together is to try to calculate what that is. If you look at the federal side, there's been $4.4 billion in investment in infrastructure, whether it was through the ARPA, the bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. It's $2 billion for transportation, $800 million for grid improvements, $600 million for resilience, clean water, and other infrastructure and conservation. And then looking at Maine's investments, if you factor in, if we knock on wood and hope that LD1 passes today, it's over $100 million worth of Maine investments, either proactive or including the reactive $60 million for storm recovery funds. So there's big dollar signs floating around. Maine has done a lot of work with the funding that we've had. And I think we know that we're going to need to continue the scale and think about ways that we can get that done within the state with federal funding when it becomes available and with our partners in philanthropy. So next slide. So the meat of this report is three broad strategy areas: strengthening infrastructure and reducing disaster risk. And I'll just go through these kind of in order. I'm not really going to read through, but what I'll do is you can see the kind of categories that the activities fall into here, but I'll just highlight some of the activities that the plan includes under each of these. So within the strengthening infrastructure and reducing disaster risk, there's activities like conducting vulnerability assessments at the state and local levels, building and maintaining a pipeline of infrastructure projects for funding, and so that we can go out to bid for projects with our firms, and firms know that there's a pipeline of these projects out there so that they can invest in increasing their capacity. Expanding workforce in the trades, in planning at the municipal level. Expanding tools, funding, and assistance for communities. publishing data on outages and where, and enabling technology like microgrids to improve our resilience in the energy grid, and assisting public and private working waterfront operators to make improvements to understand what vulnerabilities they have and react to those proactively. Next slide. And the second category is improving our disaster preparedness, response, and rebuilding. And so here we're thinking about things from emergency communications to emergency coordination and reactions, expediting permitting so that we're rebuilding faster and better after disasters, and then how we build and invest for the long run through our building codes. So there's activities here about upgrading the emergency communication system that will happen under LD1, strengthening relationships with organizations that can reach vulnerable community members. So making sure that our messaging is getting out there to where it needs to be heard. Continuing developing opportunities for permit by rule uses. Lots of great conversations in the permitting group about that one. And then supporting our building code enforcement community and expand opportunities to make our buildings more resilient. Whoops, sorry, no, we're good. Next slide. And then in our third category, these are the long-term activities that really increase our capabilities, building on the momentum that we've just talked about. So improving data and information sharing, maximizing the federal funding that's available, and developing long-term funding and financing for the state of Maine to take on these activities more and more. So activities in here include developing an online data hub so that communities and other users have access to the information that we've been talking about and that we can make that more available. Increasing flood risk tools and maps for communities, assisting communities with grant development, project development, and developing a plan for long-term funding that includes, as Charlie pointed out in the last meeting, banking and insurance functions for the state. So those are the big three areas. A lot of this will look familiar to you from the November report. It's been added to with your detail from the small group conversations and slightly repackaged in a more sequenced and plan-oriented format. So if you go to the next slide, great. So this is just to give you a little bit more sense of the detail that is in each of these sections. I just have one of these tables up here, but there are 10 or 11 of them in the report where it lists all of the activities under each strategy. So this is the data example, a time frame for when those activities could be implemented. And we have three different categories here in the time frame: 0 to 2 years. And those are the activities that we think we've identified resources that exist for them, either through funding from the legislature or that we think could potentially be reasonably executed by agencies or partners with their existing resources. In the 3 to 5 year bucket, those are activities that are priorities, but might take a little bit of work to identify the resources for. And then in the 6 to 10 year bucket, I think some of those are the ones that we really need to dig into and think about what is the long-term investment strategy here? How do we carry these out in ways that really accelerate the capacity that we have? And certainly if resources become available earlier than the timelines proposed here, we'd be quite happy to see these things move forward. The next column identifies the lead and partner entities. In many cases, it's a state agency or an office. And then identifying additional agencies or other outside partners that can contribute here. We've put Deborah on the hot spot for a couple of these and others in the room. So thank you very much for being part of that. And if any of this identification of roles feels uncomfortable to any of you, if we've identified you in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable, please let us know and we can adjust this.
Or not uncomfortable, but if you don't think your agency can pull it off or it should be broadened. I mean, yes. I think most state agencies have looked at this, but yeah, thanks.
Where there is a status update on the activity, if it's in progress or could be moving soon, we've provided that. And then the last column is identifying any resources that are currently known to be available or could become available to implement these. So that is the outline of the plan and how it functions. If you hop to the next slide, there's a section on implementation that we've broken down into 4 pieces: coordination and accountability, timeframes and sequencing, measuring our progress, and then communication and education about the plan. And this is where we have some questions for you to have to help us build these parts in the plan over the next hour or so. So this is where we have a little bit of work still to dig in today to get this this part of the plan finalized. So we're looking forward to that conversation. So with that, I'm going to stop and hand it back to Linda to take us through the first discussion, which is really a discussion about, did we get it right? What do we need to work on?
Thank you so much, Brian. Before we get into that discussion, are there any clarifying questions for Brian or for any of the GoPIF staff about what he just outlined? You clear about the structure, clear about all that, Judy?
I don't have a question. I just want to say that it was an extraordinarily well-written document. So well done.
Kudos. Kudos to you guys. Pete?
More a comment than a question, but I think an addition that we might want to consider is, this might be a moving target, I guess, but is a table at the end, which is potential alternative funding sources for a lot of our efforts. I mean, when we look through this, the BRIC program pops up as a funding source for all this. CRRC pops up. Still have CRRC, but as we know, that might be, we don't know anything about that, but other funding sources might be a good addition to the back of this, or a table of, not necessarily for each activity, but, or maybe there is we add another column here that is alternative funding sources that include a lot of public-private partnership funding sources that are out there, things like that. Yeah, but otherwise I echo Judy's comment.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Pete. For the next half hour, we're gonna have these general questions, kind of as Pete was responding to, about the plan itself. Mostly, does it capture our intent, our priorities, and our messages? And does it have enough flexibility, thank you, Pete, for this, to adapt to the changing landscape? Okay, those are our two questions for the next 30 minutes. We're gonna spend far longer on the implementation section after we take a short break from that. The implementation parts, we have a lot of specific questions we need to answer still there, not just about funding, about a lot of different things, what the structure might be, et cetera. So let's start though with this big view of it. And I almost feel like we should go around so that everybody's voices are heard. I don't have to do it that way, but I'd love for everybody to have some comment on this from your perspective and your work as a commission member. And Sam too. Does the draft plan capture our intent, our priorities, and our messaging?
Can I ask one question, Linda?
Yeah.
Of maybe you and Brian. We know some people have some very specific suggestions, like I know Deborah has a very specific one about.
Yeah.
Who's assigned something? How should we capture those things?
I think whoever's taking notes, we're just gonna capture stuff, right? I mean, I really do. I have some stuff that we talked about yesterday that's about the shape of it in regard to communications in effect. But first, I think we need to make sure that we're really all on the same page here. But some of this stuff's gonna just come out, right? It's like gonna be specific and general at the same time. So I'm gonna trust you guys to capture this and be able to sort it out. Does that make sense, Brian?
Makes great sense to me. Yeah, detailed or big picture would be super.
Yeah. So who wants to begin? You guys have done a lot of work on this. Go ahead, Ann.
I can begin, and I'll start first with kudos to the whole team. Brian's one of my favorite writers in state government. I'm just a huge fan of his writing style. I don't necessarily have additions, but just to provide context to the whole group, because in emergency management specifically, we could go this way, we could go this way. It's really important to note that our agency relies heavily on federal funding. So Brian and I have had conversations about we don't know which way this is gonna go. What can we really commit to? So from our perspective, and my full leadership team took a look at this as well. These are all recommendations. It's good to have some caveat language in there, based on the changing landscape, especially with emergency management. We could be looking at a future where we do have state-led recovery, and these are great recommendations to build out state-led recovery. We can have no emergency management, and that makes us look pretty bad because we're not delivering. Or we can have something similar to what we have now. We just have no idea what our future looks like. And so I just wanted to add that context from our perspective, that our agency takes this very seriously. We want to build out disaster recovery. That's my passion. But we just don't know where things are going to go. So we see these as recommendations and we'll try to deliver. But our leadership team is comfortable putting this to paper, everything we put in here.
Yeah,
Can I just ask you a quick question? The world in which there's no disaster recovery, though,
Not looking good
is
for
pretty
anybody.
dire, though. Like, I mean, if the federal government stopped funding it, like, if MEMA didn't exist,
Mhm.
communities would be in a tough place during
Well,
disaster.
I wanted to ask a related question to that, Hannah. I mean, so a lot of the emergency management regional agencies and people that we met with, right, in our community visits, some of whom were devastated by the losses in their communities. So where does the money come from them? It doesn't come through MEMA, or does it come through
I'm
MEMA?
sorry, could you?
So the regional emergency management people, right? The people on the ground, a lot of whom we met with.
Yeah.
Where's the money come from for those people?
Disaster Recovery Fund,
Federal money.
federal
It is federal money?
money.
So
Yeah.
all the different counties that have their own MEMA offices are all funded by the federal government, not the state government.
That is correct. Yep, and that's the scary piece for all of us is that we're so reliant on federal funding and being a pass-through entity for federal funding down to the county and local level for some of our grant programs. So we're kind of sitting tight on that. If state recovery goes to the state level, granted, we're so dependent on federal funding, it will take a long time for the state to build out emergency management effectively. So probably going a little bit farther than I should, because it's all speculation. You know, nobody knows what's gonna happen, but it's a scary time. So, I'll just circle back to the report. Our team is very comfortable with the report. We desire to deliver on everything we put in here with a caveat that we'll see. Yep.
Great, thank you.
So, great report, by the way, well done. So if someone put this in front of me and said, what do you think? And I read it. The first question I would say is, well, if we adopt all of your recommendations, how much would we spend? How much money would it take to how much would we have to put away every year to do the planning part? Do the preparations, maybe undertake resilience actions? You can't anticipate what the cost of disasters would be, but you can do all those other things. And if you do all those things, how much should we put aside? Should we ask state government to put aside $50 million a year out of the rainy day fund, or 100 million, or 200 million? I think people would like to know that, rather. It's sort of like it's a firecracker with a fuse lit, and we don't know how big the firecracker is. So if we can figure out a way to somehow put a context to the cost of it, I think we'd be ahead of the game.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's kind of like, and Hannah knows this better than I do, but what the legislature does, right, when there's bills before it and there has to be a fiscal note that says, what is the cost of this? It doesn't always say where that money is coming from, but it has to say what the cost is. Yeah, and I think it's a great idea. Thank you for that, very specific. Yep, Charlie.
So I heard that it's extremely well put together, and presented. I have provided a few edits and a few suggestions, mostly clarifying stuff. I think, however, that, that it is, and I would have written this the same way, but I think that it is understated bureaucracies. I do not think it conveys the potentially desperate situation that we're going to be in, particularly if all the federal money goes away. This this report does not grab you by the lapels and say, pay attention, this is really bad. And I think that, so I think some more of that needs to be in there, because this was a bad situation from a financial point of view before we got into the question of eliminating whole swaths of federal money. The likelihood is that if all of those things were carried out, essentially the US and Maine would simply lose large swaths of territory. You know, we would wipe out towns. And there would be no recovery. No recovery is an option. That's on the table. You simply lose all the property and let it go back to nature. So I think some more urgency needs to be put in it. And I think that the corollary to that as an action is that the recommendations for a continuation of effort, whether it be with this group or with another group on the funding side, should be ratcheted up in terms of priority. I think we need to say to the governor, you have to, you know, if it were me, I would say, can take the funding working group from this group, add or subtract as appropriate, according to taste. And have them produce a new report by November on at least a preliminary report on the major funding options for if Maine has to go it either alone or mostly alone. Because that may be the situation as early as the end of this year. And I think that I think we've done a fabulous job of preparing us for the world into which we are emerging because of climate change and other factors, but not the world into which we are emerging in terms of public policy. And so I would be a little more urgent about the problem and a little more directive about getting right at the funding issues.
Yeah, great, Charlie. I really, I totally appreciate the urgency. That's one of our goals that I laid out at the beginning, that we said that we have to have a sense of urgency about this. And I think it is completely, you know, normal. It's how we all learn to like write reports and plans, right? So like kind of suck some of that urgency out of it, right? So maybe we need to be a little bit dramatic, and maybe we need to think a little bit about how that dramatic energy gets in there right up front. And one of the things I talked with Brian about, for example, was, you know, if we see this about how effective we're communicating with our state and our municipalities, like, where are the bullet points up front? Are we burying the lead? You know, like, or do we need more urgency up front? So I think that what you're saying really coincides with that. And of course, your focus on funding, you know, we're gonna need some alternate plans. And, you know, and as I suggested, maybe we lean more heavily into things that we didn't think we were gonna have to lean heavily into. And maybe that requires some different strategies. Great. Thank you for those comments, Charlie. Did you get all that, you guys? Good. Carl?
Yeah, I mean, we've already got a section right on the first page or number 4, a new era of risk, right? And so it's in many ways, the funding uncertainty is a risk. And maybe there's something that could be added into that section that describes those percentages, what's state and federal, and what's, you know, like a magnitude and a percentage of activities, and what that risk of losing one or the other or both. So give the reader a view of what the dependence on federal funding is, but also what the challenge would be to replace that with a state funding of some sorts. Just the thought, but I would put it in the new era of risk, because that's what we're talking about is.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that idea. Sam, I'm kind of curious, I guess. I always think of Texas relying less on federal money to begin with than other states. I mean, what's happening down there in terms of managing a new era of risk? I'm just curious.
I'm actually sitting here watching the live budget session in Texas, which takes 20 hours. So I don't even know why I'm looking at it, but that Texas sees itself as a national leader in having done this. They still rely a lot on federal money. They don't think they do, but they do, right? All the mitigation and the PAIA stuff. But they see this as a new era of opportunity where they want to go out and help other states in times of needs. And get the resources to be able to do that. So it's more optimistic in Texas, which is vastly different than every other group that I've talked to or heard from. And Texas has a ton of money. I mean, there's hundreds of billions of dollars. They dip into their huge rainy day fund. They did after Hurricane Harvey. And they have, a lot of it is oil revenue. And so the coffers are overfilling in Texas. I sit here, I think, well, how can I, in my position, use that to help Maine? And there are ways for Texas to help Maine. But to the plan, since
Your pilot.
yeah, right? There are ways. But like was said, who knows? It's so, I never thought brick would go down like that out of nowhere and so much. I just thought, well, they think FEMA is purely response. They're not gonna touch the mitigation stuff. But it says climate. It's so political. And my hope is like, okay, we're gonna put money, we're gonna rebrand the programs. You can't say climate, you can't say diversity or anything like that. And then we'll show like, and then you could basically do very similar things is my only hope. But every state is probably having the same discussion. What you all have is a newly minted plan. And in my experience, the big foundations, which are gonna seek to fill some of these gaps, they respond really well with a plan and they go through, oh, we want to invest in this part of it. And I would, when you write the plan, think about as that alternative source of funding, how that may resonate with foundations. And then there's philanthropic individuals out there who are gonna seek to fill some of these gaps in this, huge transfer of wealth that's occurring. Apparently my parents' generations, I don't know what my parents were thinking. I'm not seeing any of that, but I think, what Charlie's getting at is some of those alternative strategies and not just think about the strategies, but as you write the plan. So, the Rockefeller Foundation and those, they love plans. I've failed more times in foundations because they're like, well, it's too broad. We want a plan. We want a task we can support. Back to the kind of high level, if I may, with the plan. I tried to read it as an outsider. I think of myself as an insider, but most people will read the first couple pages. I've learned the hard way. On number 2, enhancing communications, during and immediately after, you may want to think about it's the plan supports not just that, but also before. And then why not increase communication before? And like, well, I was thinking, well, it's down on 3 in improved data information sharing, but then it specifies leaders. And as an outsider, when this gets into the local news, if you could say, it's not just gonna help leaders, it's gonna help citizens, individuals, and it's supported by the actions. it just came across to me as not early enough with your communication and to include not just leaders, but make it clear it's individuals, the citizens of Maine that are and that's gonna help gain traction. In terms of the timelines, if you could think more, cut the pie up in smaller pieces, 0 to 2, 3 to 5, those are really broad. And it doesn't have to be in the plan, but what I would, and this is just a suggestion, you pass the plan, okay, now we go from plan to playbook. What are the first 10 things we're gonna do? Because 2 years, you could do, half your stuff is 2 years. Among those half of those things, what's the next step? And then you can go to the governor and say, okay, here's this great plan, it's awesome for those who wrote it. Here's our playbook. And the playbook can change, but we're gonna do bum, 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 and then we're gonna fold back and say, okay, did we do it? Do we not? And it's a risk, because if you don't do it, you look bad, but if you do it, you can declare victory. And that'll then fold back into more opportunity to get funding. So there's a lot
Yeah.
there, but those are my high level suggestions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sam.
So,
Sorry, I didn't see. Okay, Joyce.
at the risk of guys laughing at me, but there's two things that strike me, and as the entity that has been actually, and probably with Annie, delivering resilience projects for the last 2 or 3 years, I see two real big needs for the people that we've been working with both towns, water districts, sewer districts. And in an emergency, I don't think there's a place people can turn for coordinated permitting advice. I think DP does it de facto, we do it de facto sometimes, but people are really scared, towns, individuals, they don't know how to navigate the system, especially if they need a core permit. I think there's nothing in here, so whether that's MOCA, whoever it is, I think all the stuff, the permitting group was hard to wrangle, and I thought Brian did a great job. But don't underestimate how tough it is to get through the system when you're scared and you're in the middle of an emergency, right? People aren't thinking clearly, and it's tough, and I think DP has been really agreeable to doing a whole bunch of stuff, but they're a little piece of the puzzle. I keep mentioning that. What I don't see in here is there has to be some kind of coordinated effort, including the feds, because they are not geared up to do resilience projects, and you don't have to do anything. But we just heard, like Army Corps, for us to do the Deer Isle, they want $1.6 million in mitigation fees, even though we're trying to do the best we can to stay out of the water. That is purely a resilience project, right? We've offered to do mitigation, maybe put a box culvert in, not good enough, you gotta still do more, and we're not set up, I think, at
Who is,
Army Corps.
Army Corps wants 1.6 million.
Yeah, and I guess my point is, we're working with water districts who are struggling, they've got our state money, but then they get federal money, and then they get dragged into the NEPA process, and all of a sudden, it's taking years and extra money, and I think, and it's like this all over the country, no one has solved this problem, and I honestly, really, the last Trump administration, I stood up at meetings and waved my arm, and they said, oh, we fixed it, just shut up. Well, it's not fixed. It's really, really hard to do these resilience projects environmentally, because the federal agencies are not talking to each other, and they're not set up to deal with resiliency and weigh that against other environmental factors. And I think state agencies in this administration have been terrific. Everybody's talked, everyone works together, and I joke, but DEP, I can call Rob up and say, this is the project. We've been talking about Deer Isle, he's working with us, we're trying to get our way through some issues. But there's nothing in here about that, so we can do all of the planning we want, get all the money we want, and if nobody can build it, that's gonna be a problem. So I know I'm like a broken record, but I think it's because we're trying to build with communities, and we're watching you understand what I'm saying too. We're watching people, I'm worried we're gonna be turning money back because they cannot get their permits and get the environmental things they need to make these deadlines. So, you know, I have a sense of urgency, Charlie, because I'm worried we're gonna get the money and not be able to produce. So I know I'm like a broken record, I apologize, but it's just, it really is a thing.
Joyce, what would you suggest? I mean, just thinking about what we add in here, some sort of
I think we need,
coordinated permitting
I mean,
hub for communities.
that's one, and I think we have to have, I think we need to have rabble rouse with our fellow states who are doing these kinds of things and try to have more than just the state of Maine going federally and saying, you know, lots of us have these plans. We don't all have the same problems, but many of us are running into these things. You know, I've talked to New York, they're having similar issues, the West Coast, similar issues. You know, I think we have to have a different plan working with our state agents, you know, our federal, the states who are doing similar things and see if we can come together, red and blue states, saying we need to think about this. Because, you know, I don't know, Sam, what you think, but I'm not seeing a lot of well-meaning people, right? And even now, I mean, we just got told this in the Trump administration about the 1.6, and I'm like, kidding. So I think we have to go national. We're not gonna fix it unless we get more states to be with us on this issue.
If it's a state, it's now a state issue, that'll cross all the lines, the political lines.
Yeah.
And build a state, it makes sense. Listening to Charlie, which I always do, if I was gonna be dire, the congressional delegation, Angus and Collins, they still have power to, in Congress, to allocate resources. You think they would be ones to lean on and cry, we need this, go get this out of Congress. As a way to, you know, an alternative to the federal government. There's there's earmark activities going on, Congress is still operating like Congress. And Angus is pretty powerful, so I would get him to at least to be,
Collins is even more so.
yeah. He saved the day,
And,
right?
but she's struggling and the whole earmark thing, you know, I think is might be wishful thinking, right? I mean, so that's what they're holding out as the solution right now of, okay, well, they're taking our money away over here, but we're gonna put it back over here. But that's Charlie shaking his head. It didn't fly for this year.
$460 million of earmarks that Susan Collins had put in.
Yeah.
And that was the Republicans in Congress, it wasn't the administration.
Yeah.
That paid for part of their tax cut.
But it's not just the money. I don't want to lose Joyce's point. I appreciate you being a broken record. You know, my motto, it takes at least 7 times for anybody to hear anything. And obviously it takes actually maybe 30 on this issue for anybody to hear anything. And some of what you're saying, and I just want to make sure everybody hears this really well, like we could have all of our ducks in a row with all of our state agencies. But those federal agencies are still a problem and we don't control them unless perhaps we can do a coalition of the willing and really put like massive state pressure on them. I think we have to actually team up with the big states like Texas and California and New York in order for that to be possible, because we just don't have enough leverage. But, you know, the Army Corps, when it comes to permitting, is huge. And they're operating as their own little universe over here. They really are. I haven't seen Doge looking at them yet.
I will say we did try to initiate with the permitting group. I reached out to Army Corps to have a conversation about some of the things we talked about and we got deflected back. So, but Rob has included us and DMR has included us in a conversation, but we had been not involved. So I think we'll be able to have some conversation now because our sister agencies invited us to participate. It's just, and I'm not saying we should just dump all the environmental rules, please. Trust me, if Bruce was here, he thinks I'm like too green, so sometimes, don't tell him I said that. Don't anyone tell him I said that, but.
Nobody's listening.
I should have said that, but I just, you know, it's the pragmatic piece of accomplishing this stuff. And at the staff level, they're following the rules. They're doing what they've been told to do. That's what the law says. And, it's not a people issue. There are some specific legislative things that need to happen.
And when we get to the implementation, I see, when we get to the implementation part of this, we're gonna go back to that because Jack and the permitting group has had some really good ideas and we're not gonna lose those. We're gonna keep pushing those forward. So Noel, go ahead.
I want to go back to what Charlie brought up earlier, and I agree with him. I think there's a need for us to strategize and spend some energy on like laying this out in a way that addresses the kind of dire situation we are in. I may, and maybe Charlie didn't mean this, but I heard a sense of like we need to kind of highlight how dire it is. And while I agree with that, I also feel like it also shouldn't be so, we shouldn't come across as making it so, or we should sound so scary that'll kind of keep people away from wanting to hold on to that hope of really wanting to accomplish something. So it's slightly, nuanced and way of approaching that, but I completely agree with what he's saying. And I think I'd love for us to spend some energy there. And then Joyce's statement about like how we are working really well together in our state as state agencies and that great camaraderie and exchange. And I think it'd be great as part of a measure to kind of formalize that, because I think those great relationships and those great working collaborative efforts are happening because of who's in those positions right now and who's in those departments. And I think part of making it a more sustainable model is we formalize those relationships and require those relationships by naming those in our planning process. And I also agree with the kind of regional approach of connecting with other states and kind of making this a bigger movement and kind of making it a stronger voice. Having said all of that, I also wanted to add that it'd be great for us to talk about what it would mean to be able to do this without any external support at all. I think we're spending a lot of time and it's not wrong, I'm not debating that at all, about how difficult it is going to be with all the unpredictability of the external influences. But I think we should also really have a conversation about what if we didn't have any of that. And I thought I heard Charlie allude to that as well. What would that mean to us and what can we do? I think we're there. I know I brought this up in October before we went into the elections, and I'm not sure it was the Climate Council or this body, but it is a conversation we need to have because I think it's possible, but we need to explore that and we need to kind of get the ball rolling on that as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really. And I really hear you. And I think that there are ways that we can highlight the urgency. And then kind of what Sam was saying, if we have like an action plan and there are small enough actions that are forefronted that we can actually have wins on, the same way as with LD1, because that's what builds momentum, right? It's like being able to get something done and having a win builds momentum for the rest of it. And so we've got to bite off stuff in small enough ways that we can have those wins and create that momentum. So as Noel was just saying, people don't feel overwhelmed by the task at hand and just ditch the report. Judy?
Just a couple of thoughts. I agree that the coordination on permitting makes all the sense in the world. But I was a little concerned to hear that maybe it be MOCA who facilitates that. I don't know if you meant that, but MOCA's got a lot to do. They are being called upon to do practically everything the let's get MOCA to do it.
Yeah.
And that's.
Before they've even fully finished creating it. Yeah.
Exactly. And, their focus is community assistance in terms of technical assistance and grant programs. To take on this permitting issue, I think, would be a death knell. And I'm sorry, Rob, but I think it falls more on your shoulders.
You and Joyce.
As the coordinating agency for that kind of a thing. Maybe they can help facilitate, but I just really feel like MOCA's being called on to do way too much.
I think that's just a super good point. I just want to remind us there that within MOCA is the State Resilience Office. And I think that's really what Joyce was referring to, because what she's talking about is how do we,
Facilitate the conversation.
about
Sure.
resilience,
Yeah,
and how do we forefront resilience as a priority relative to these other priorities around permitting?
But I don't disagree with Judy, though, when we get to, maybe it's sort of like who implements some of these things. Because I do think they're sort of, the agencies of state government who build things are the closest to the permitting, and the federal permitting that DOT does or IF&W is involved in, they may be able to provide more expertise to communities. So I don't know, Joyce, if you have a thought on that, but
No, yeah, I mean.
you were volunteering for this task though, right?
Well, we do it. I mean, that is the issue is towns will call because they don't know who else to call. And I think DEP is a great place to put it, but I think they'll need capacity. They're overwhelmed. I mean, we all know that. But I think it needs to go somewhere, whether it's at MEMA. I mean, MEMA has come to mind because it's not helping them get the permits. It's helping point them in the direction of who they have to talk to and help, the frequently asked questions almost like, so I don't think you have to hold their hand to get the permit. I think you just have to say, look, if you're gonna do this, DEP might push back on this, so think about that, and off you go, and try to send them in the best way they can to know, what they're gonna hear.
To add to that, the Resilience Office network of that will coordinate the regional coordinators that have already been hired. One of the educational train the trainer options for those regional coordinators could be this kind of information about how to navigate the permitting world. So they're not solving the problem, but they have enough knowledge about it to direct people into the right place. So that might be something that the Resilience Office could contribute there. So I actually had a completely different thought too, if I could, while I'm chatting here.
Floor, go for it.
It's on page 19 where it says, assist towns to establish resilience reserve accounts and capital investment plans. And the time frame is over 3 to 5 years. And my sense is this is not a hard lift. Maybe the 3 to 5 years is to get everybody to do it. I'm not sure what the time frame thinking was there, but technical assistance materials to explain how to create these things, that's not hard. That's a quick lift. So I think the time frame could be shorter. The other thing I think in there is not just to assist them, but to incentivize them. Like that you get a payback if you've got a resilience reserve account and a reasonably good capital investment plan. So I would strengthen that recommendation to some kind of incentive program that if you've got one, then you're going to get, other state funding, perhaps not federal.
Or you don't have to do a match.
Or bingo,
lets
you've
them
got
do
your
a
match. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
But I just think that's a really underutilized vehicle for towns to make a big difference. And that, you're not going to get hit this year or maybe next year, but the third year, if you get hit, you've put something away each time. It just makes all the sense in the world. I always advised towns to do that.
Absolutely, and we're all supposed to budget for depreciation too, and we know how that happens in the budgeting process. I mean, this is the problem I see, right, with reserve accounts and depreciation, is that they're like non-cash, apparently. Deborah, I think you had your hand up.
And I think you had these two guys.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things I'd like to mention as kind of the non-state government person here is, I think even before the federal crisis, we had both an opportunity and a responsibility to partner outside of state government. As much as I understand the important role that, and critical role that state government plays, we have a strong and effective not-for-profit sector. And we're learning more and more about what their roles have been in supporting resilience across the state. And again, I think Now we have both the opportunity and the responsibility. And I think, some of them do have significant expertise, some don't, but, and also in some ways that's easier for philanthropy to support. And so I think it would be I would love to mention that a little bit more in the report and try to identify ways where the not-for-profit sector could be helpful and really could be a good partner with MOCA, for example. Especially, we talked about the incredible need for capacity building and TA. In my opinion, that's a really, a thing that philanthropy can support and would be interested in supporting and building our resilience. So that's, I would just like to see a little bit more of that, because I think one of the things I think that is terrific about this commission is that it does have a little bit of many sectors at the table. And I think we should reflect in the report. That's my place.
Great, thanks, Deborah. So who was,
I don't call or Tom or Rob, one of you had your hand
one
up.
of you guys?
I had just a quick point on,
Go for it.
earlier around the kind of the permitting pathways or,
That's fine.
when our department applied for some NEMA money, we got some examples of successful applications. And I think that was really helpful to have, examples of what's the breadth of the scope people are looking for? Does that mean this particular answer? And you can see how somebody has successfully answered that question before. And it really helps on the application process. So it's a small addition, but people and then examples too.
Great, thanks, Carl. Rob?
Sure, yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to provide feedback, and I'll just, I mean, I can piggyback on that. We do have one recommendation or one activity in the expediting permitting section dealing with creating educational materials. I think the concept is to as part of creating those materials, to create case studies or examples, as you described, Commissioner, to show successful permit applications. And I think, to somebody else's point earlier, we probably don't need 3 to 5 years to do that. So maybe that's something we could bump up a little bit more. I think maybe a couple of these other ones, we could flip flop and try to expedite, creation of educational materials. And I do think, to Joyce's point, it would be fantastic to have, more of a concerted effort around coordination, to the extent that, the Army Corps and other agencies are willing and able to coordinate. We are right now being invited to weigh in on the Corps' proposed updated general permits, and so that they need to be updated by October of this year. But I think they're heading in a very clear direction, which is adopting nationwide permits, and that's going probably to happen regardless of what the state of Maine says. And I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing as far as ease of permitting. Those might actually be less restrictive standards in a lot of cases than the regional general permits. And so all to say, I do think DEP would need some additional capacity, and really, I think would love to have that capacity. We do have in the governor's budget proposal 2 additional FTEs to provide customer service. So we have not within the Land Bureau that I direct, but in the commissioner's office, there's an office of innovation and assistance, and they are kind of designed to provide kind of public assistance to folks who call in with questions, specifically businesses. But I think the idea is to kind of expand that to the broader public. And so those 2 positions are proposed to support that Office of Innovation and Assistance. And if we had those 2 positions, I think those would be the types of positions that would be ideal to kind of run kind of a coordination effort and provide more of a one-stop shop potentially for members of the public who might need kind of more guidance on permitting, not just at the state level, but at the federal and local level. And I will just say, we do have staff on call all the time who can answer questions for anyone who calls in or emails us. And we do regularly provide guidance on not just state permitting, but also federal and local permitting. And many of our rules include notes that say, hey, if you're applying for this permit with the DEP, you also will have to get an Army Corps permit, or don't forget your local shoreland zoning ordinance when you're applying to do this activity. So we try to try to make sure we emphasize that as well, but, overall, I'll just say, I think the report looks great. I appreciate that. I think most of the permitting recommendations have been consolidated in one section. I think we previously had two sections where they were kind of sprinkled in two different sections. So it's great to have one section focused on permitting. I think we can, execute on these recommendations. I would say the one, maybe have one or two wordsmithing things that I might bring to Brian, but I think there are a couple of pieces here where the DEP might not technically have the authority to do something, right? So it suggests that we should develop a list of additional regulatory exemptions. I think that should be a list of suggested regulatory exemptions. Obviously, it's up to the legislature to create new exemptions. And then similarly, for expanding uses of permit by rule, we can come up with proposed permit by rule revisions, but the Board of Environmental Protection is the entity that changes rules. So it's not the DEP. So we have the ability to propose things and recommend things, but we might not always have the power to explicitly change things ourselves at the DEP other than our internal processes. So,
Yeah, good point.
yeah,
Thanks, Rob.
sure.
While I'm on that side of the table, how about you, Dan?
Yeah, well, I'd like to go on how to get Brian to do more writing for our office. So I agree with that, especially.
I saw you slipping them notes.
No, I mean, I think from I'm also, in my mind trying to refocus, there's a lot of, at least from an energy perspective, a lot of things that resilience means. This is focused on, I think, and predicated on the storms and climate change. Our office is doing a lot of work around, okay, tariff response and, relationship with our provinces. And in that mind frame, somewhat, I know that's not necessarily germane here. I think on the energy section, I think I have some similar to Rob, some wordsmithing sections on the language up front that I don't think will change the meaning of the words. I think on some of the activities and actions, probably want to, addressing winter energy reliability, volatility, and cost concerns in the next 2 years, kind of broadening that to, we're not going to solve energy volatility or reliability issues, but kind of in 2 years, right? That's a kind of a decades-long endeavor. And so how do we maybe refine that a little bit more? So mostly just refinement, I think, of the activities and really focus on what can we do, whether it's data, information, those types of things, and kind of continue to update it. And then we've left resources kind of blank on the energy side of the call talks, and that's a big question, right? We talked about federal funds. Obviously, our utilities are making investments with ratepayer funds now, and really just how we think about what those resources might be and what the appropriate mix is, given all that's happening. So
Yeah.
that's my sense.
Good, thank you. We're supposed to take a break, but I actually want to make sure that all the voices are heard at the table. So the people who have not had a chance yet, I'm looking at Emily,
Pete
Lisa,
had his hand up.
Shiloh, I see Pete's hand up. Those are the folks I want to hear from quickly before we go on break, and then we'll go on break. And when we come back, we've got 3 big buckets that we have to do. Pete, go ahead.
Building on some of the comments that other folks have made, one thing I think that we could add to our activity list is the potential for regional collaboration. So we can maybe leverage existing partnerships with other states, with other organizations. So for instance, the ISO New England here comes to mind in terms of energy. That's a regional collaboration, but I think we may want to identify other regional collaborations and other regional partnerships that already exist and try to potentially leverage those partnerships for exchange of information as to what other states and organizations are doing. And also potentially, I leaned over and asked Charlie this, and I asked, have there been interstate funding programs? And he basically didn't think there were, at least.
There have been in the past.
Together to fund.
Oh, there have been in the past, when they had the watershed commissions that were killed off by Reagan, but they were federally funded. I think Pete's question was, are there any examples of state-funded and state-operated interstate organizations? And I said, I don't know of any. All the ones I know of have federal funding at the base.
Yeah, so.
I mean, ISO is,
But ISO is a private organization.
They're nonprofit that we all pay for to manage.
Right,
right.
manage their
Yeah, that's
resources.
true.
But
And
that,
FERC regulated, so there is a federal tie, but they, we are doing weekly, daily planning with the counterparts in the other states and ISO, and, their job to ensure resource adequacy, but yeah.
But I think we could potentially identify other regional partnerships like that that could be advantageous in support of this plan and maybe even leverage those partnerships to have, larger grants applications to philanthropic foundations or things like that, where it's not just Maine going for it. Anyway, just a thought that came to me as I listened in on the rest of the discussions.
Thanks, Pete. I don't want to hear about Canada anymore, okay?
I promise I'm not gonna bring up Canada. The playbook idea has been something that's been sitting in my mind as we've been talking for the past, half hour or so. And I had written down before I even walked in the room that I think we need to bake in here some low-hanging fruit that allows us to move forward quickly over the next 6 months to a year that already utilizes entities that we have in place, whether it's the nonprofits, the regional planning organizations, the resilience coordinators, things like education and outreach, even if it's something as small as a workshop at the regional level on how do you navigate the permitting process at the federal level. Those things, we have the entities in place to be able to quickly act on those. And so I know you had asked at the beginning of this conversation, like, what's the first thing we ask the governor to do? And I think it's created implementation committee that's not just state agencies, but that they're like this mix of people on this commission now who look at, we need to create the implementation committee to come up with the quick hits in terms of a playbook that we're going to check the boxes in the next 6 months that doesn't require funding. Because I think our critics will say, oh, this is just another, huge checkbook of things that we have that we want to do that we can't fund. And so what are those pieces that we can do and we can do quickly with the people we have, whether it's in this room or others, and really start showing that there's momentum moving forward and can continue to move forward with or without the federal government.
Yeah, great. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And we're going to get to dig down into implementation shortly after our break. So keep on that thinking. Lisa.
Oh, thanks. When I'm reviewing resiliency studies and plans from staff in our office, I think about timelessness. And, one thing that jumped out was when somebody was talking about recent storms. What does that mean when you have a document like this that really gets printed and there it is? So I'm not sure, I'm sure you kind of were thinking about that because I can see it in this doc. But, what things are quickly getting outdated? And how can we add that flexibility that we're kind of talking about? That because we are already seeing some of the things are not available that are in here. So that was just one thought I had. Because I guess what we're doing is doing resiliency plans and then we're giving them to some of the towns who then want to manage them. And they've got online story works that they can update with their GIS as things change in the plan. So this feels more to me like a snapshot in time. But I don't know if we want to be prescriptive about what we intend it to be. Is it we talk about actionable, but things are changing so quickly. And there's some of it could be quickly not timeless. That's just one thought there. And then the other, to Charlie's point about drama, you mentioned the drama. I always kind of go through and I go, well, why? Why is that so important? What would happen if we didn't do anything? And, it would go back to nature. There might be like 5 things that we can consistently kind of say, here's the dark side of not doing anything. I don't know if it would be helpful or if it would help get our point across. So kind of the why is each activity important? What happens if it doesn't, if we don't act? But anyway, just.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And Shiloh, last but not least in the room.
I'll second everybody else's opinion on this. It's a great report. I really appreciate the way it's written. I appreciate the bullets and the, action items, the times associated with them. It feels like this is a plan that can be implemented. It's something that we can use to move forward. So I really appreciate that. I think most of my comments I could really say for our second discussion. I will just say, like Charlie's statement about needing to be urgent and about, there is an option where a town disappears because of a disaster. And I was looking, when we were here before and you're looking at the storms in North Carolina and I'm thinking, what would I do if that was my town? Because if you don't have that federal money, if you don't have that state money, there were areas of the Carolinas that I thought there is no way our town could have recovered. And there's no way our town municipally could have, but even our residents, like, their option would have been to move to another town to, like, are you abandoning towns because we don't have the resources? And I know that may sound like really extreme and you lose people with that, but it was reality when I was watching it, like, what would we do? So I think there really does need to be an urgency to what we're saying and to be able to get that message across. And so part of my comments, I think, go more toward, I'm going to say marketing, but really, how do we put this out there so that people hear it? And, a document is great. A lot of people won't read it, so what's our next step? How do we get that out to the public? All these small wins or big wins, how do we get that out so that people are seeing them, so we keep that momentum going? So that's what I have.
The municipal people on the same page, once again. That was the conversation I had with these guys yesterday, so I hear you. And actually, as you guys are talking, both you two, the idea of starting with a story that is either real or fabulistic, that's like a paragraph long. It's not like a 10-page story, but something that really grabs people's attention as a image or a dramatic image. I don't know. I mean, I usually work in other realms. Maybe state reports don't do that, but in some ways I really see that having that story is effective, right? In terms of how it grabs people's attention. But I don't want to omit you up there on the screen.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Linda. I echo the comments that folks have said about the quality of the work. And also, I wanted to thank you, Linda and Dan, for your leadership on the commission. It's been a good example of the way that the private sector and the public sector can work together. A couple of thoughts. One is, I think that the sense of urgency is captured on pages 10 and 11. And maybe we need to move up some of those bullets. You said the situation is urgent. Maine must become more active, capable, and self-resourced. The financial scale of Maine's infrastructure resilience challenge is extensive. I didn't get to that. I did read the whole thing, but I didn't get to it until pages 10 and 11. So, I think it's there. I also am a former journalist, and I like the angle of a story, either a fictional or a nonfiction story about, well, there are options, right? You could just abandon certain parts of the coast or riverine communities. So I think that might be helpful. A couple of other points. One is, I think it would be helpful if we had a table. I know we have on page 3, we have the infrastructure resilience plan summary. Those are, kind of high level things to a certain extent. And I thought maybe, and I don't know how it would fit, we do have tables sort of scattered throughout in each of the sections. I don't know if it makes sense to move them up front, to have, a section up front that lists it out in semi-chronological order. Like, these are the things that, can be done in the near term. Here's the midterm, and here's a longer term section. And then, yeah, those are the main points. Again, really appreciate being part of this commission. I think, I'll tell you a quick story. I had a meeting recently with folks from Connecticut, and then I was interviewed by some national publication, insurance publication, which I'm sure everybody on this meeting reads cover to cover. And they were talking about, well, how did you get LD1, supported by Democrats and Republicans, and how has Maine made such progress in this space? And I think it's the collaborative spirit. You don't find, I've worked in and around government for 40 plus years. You don't find states that work as collaboratively as this state does. And I think we should take great pride in that. And the fact that you have so many, from the private sector, municipalities, and state government, state agencies talking to one another, in some states that doesn't happen. So I think we have a lot going for us, and I don't think we should let the craziness of DC distract us from our mission. So thank you very much. I have to leave at the top of the hour, but I do, and I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but thank you very much.
Well, thanks for those comments, Bob. greatly appreciated, and there were a lot of heads nodding around the room. I don't know how much you can see us. And I realize Dr. Va are you with us, Dr. Va?
I am. Sorry my camera's off and I couldn't join. I'm a bit under the weather and I figured I should keep that to myself.
Yeah.
I agree with everything everyone has said. You know, as as Bob was speaking and others were speaking, you know, it really is, this isn't just a very specific sector thing. You know, of course, like I work in the space of public health. So like, you know, what's happening federally as it's reshaping and breaking, literally breaking down what we formerly understood as institutions and norms. You know, it is unfortunately the ripple impacts and effects sort of cuts across and down to the state and local level. And I think that's what's important to share, to Bob's point about like how do you communicate this out? You know, I don't think people are what I'm learning in our public health world is it's not always immediately understood what federal changes, when you make federal changes, how that impacts state and local and shapes our state and local policies and capabilities. Um, but in understanding that, I think that's how you sort of bring the public along so they understand what's happening. I am thinking about this and trying to think about like cross-cutting lessons learned. Um, One of the things that you know, I do agree with Bob. I think some of those urgent points are there. We just have to move them up higher. I think broadly what's happening is definitely a smaller federal footprint and, you know, wanting states to be more accountable, more resilient. And we have to figure out what that does indeed look like, whether, you know, as this partnership evolves between state and private sector. I think in order to understand that, it would be good to get a cost estimate on what that could cost the state so we know what we're working towards or trying to do. In terms of like state resiliency and capacity, we're doing the same types of exercises at the Maine CDC too. And what we've learned is similar, I think someone brought this up, you know, working regionally with other states. We started doing that, but the scope of our scope of focus is very public healthy, meaning like, you know, we are, you know, meeting as state health commissioners or state health officers. Our labs are meeting together, our communication and marketing teams are meeting together, our state EPIs are meeting together, and really just getting to know one another and trying to figure out how, you know, what are those priorities and how do we help one another out as we're dismantling what we understand of our institution, but potentially rebuilding something new too. So those discussions are being had in the public health world, and I see some overlaps here also. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for landing that discussion in a way that we see the opportunity in all this, because I think there are opportunities here, and especially for this commission and for this particular work, which I think is very bipartisan. We are running behind in part because that clock is badly wrong. Everybody just set that's 15 minutes behind. It's actually 2:45 right now. We're going to take a 5-minute break because there is coffee and cookies over there and bathrooms down the hall. So let's take a 5-minute break. When we come back, tracking and accountability, input on performance measures, and communications and engagement specifics. We need specifics in those 3 areas to fill out this plan. Thanks all. 5 minutes. for all of that good work. So the first discussion is really about tracking and accountability, and we've touched on this. And this is going to involve, some of the ideas, for example, about permitting, like how do we move forward with that? I know that my co-chair Dan is very much on the wanting a private sector group to work with the state around permitting. And Jack, I know you've got some thoughts about this, so why don't you start?
That's a perfect segue. Thank you. So on page 26, there's a call out box. And in the middle column, basically it has DEP as the lead on everything. And what Dan and I talked about is involving people and interest from outside of the DEP to be a part of that process as well, to get some different, if you have a restaurant and you just ask your staff how the food is, you really should ask the customers, right? And I think Dan and I talked about organizing an outside group to participate in that process, to give a sort of a customer standpoint on this, and that's what I would propose that we do going forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, this is our discussion on implementation, right? And tracking and accountability is key. So there's one idea or one area of that. Judy.
I had a similar thought because I was really struck by Commissioner Loisam's presentation at the Climate Council meeting a couple weeks ago, and just how much DEP has done, trying to streamline, add permit by rule, create technical assistance. Some of that's not even finished yet. It's really exceptional, and the call out box describes it. But what would be really helpful is testimonials, because we've said that there'll be testimonials and call out boxes. But from the people who it made a difference to them. Because I'm remembering the field visit in Rumford, and people were very, very grateful for how fast and effective DEP was coming in and addressing, especially the fuel tanks in the basements. And, sure, things can improve, but let's recognize when they have and find out when things work. And then I agree on a implementation committee that continues to include the permitted, that's the right word, the regulated community, just to keep on improving. But I think testimonials of just when it works would be good.
Great, thank you. More on the story front again, actually, that's another story thing. Jack, let me just ask you a question. Do you see this particular body, which is really kind of about tracking and accountability, but also input, I guess, to state agencies? Do you see it as a standalone around permitting, or do you see it as part of a larger kind of accountability organization?
We talked about collaboration as a group here, and I agree that works. So I think it should be a collaborative group with the DEP and with other involved agencies and AGC, Maine DOT and others, and just get the outside perspective instead of just everything from inside.
Yeah, for sure. But I guess what I'm saying is, do you see that that separate group just about permitting, or do you see it as part of a larger group, maybe around the whole plan?
Well, that's a big question.
I was thinking about that as he described it, because I think as we get to what happens with this group, and I mean, we've had different comments about this, this is a time limited commission, but there's some ongoing parts of this work and implementation. So I think if there ends up being some recommendation to the governor to have an ongoing, basically outside stakeholders to work with state agencies on resilience issues and rebuilding, I think the permitting kind of stakeholders could fit within that. If it doesn't, I think what Jack proposes is, I mean, it's essentially how do you continue to involve municipal leaders, industry leaders, and others who are dealing with building things, who could work on the issue Joyce raised, who could work on sort of, how do you keep lobbying Rob to keep doing things that are helpful? So, I mean, I think that was the point of what you're trying to,
So it would have to be fairly well defined, right? So we're talking about permit reform, permit managing that. In order to have a larger group, it would have to have a specific charge, very specific directives from the governor or from whoever to make that work. It can't just be an open-ended thing. Let's work on this some more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so let's put that question on the table. So there are, what did you guys tell me the other day? More than 3,000 state commissions to which the governor appoints members, something insane.
To her, the bane of her existence, how
The
many?
bane of, well,
There's many state commissions, and a lot of them are very productive, and some of them are kind of shelved. And probably you all serve on a few of them, so.
so that's the question. So we get back to the question of where government works and where government doesn't work, and what is the best way for this to work to assure implementation? Because again, we want this to be an example of where government's working. So I guess one of the questions I would automatically ask coming from the private sector is there already an existing body for whose job this is, so that we're not duplicating effort, or that.
I would say the things that I think work best are not ongoing commissions, but rather a task force with a sunset date that's very specific, because I don't want to be on one about permit reform. I've been there, done that, don't care to do it again before I retire because it'll never end. Very specific to resilience. We're talking about resilience efforts that are good for the state, right? These are good projects, and there's a quagmire of things in the mix. So I think a task force that's asked to do something specific, you can still engage people long enough to know that there's an ending and still have something specific that comes out of it around a specific topic.
So kind of like, would you say, Joyce, a resilience task force
Yeah.
for a year, something
Yeah,
like that?
something like that, yeah.
That follows through on the, on this plan?
Yeah.
And, yeah, great. So that's on the table, yeah.
Is it helpful, to talk about, so we spent some time talking to Linda and Dan about this question of sort of what comes next. And I think actually Charlie prompted this because, we're all like, great, almost done with this plan. And, we have state agencies assign portions of the plan. So, okay, moving forward. But the landscape is shifting. And this was never going to be perfect in terms of like, we wrap it up, everyone get it done, because there are funding issues. How much is it going to cost? What are the priorities? So we talked a bit about what comes next, who's responsible for this plan, who's accountable for this plan, because, we don't like state government. We've done a good job under Governor Mills of not just creating plans, but actually trying to do the things we say we're going to do. So we sort of brainstormed that. There are entities that have overlap and responsibility that some of you all are involved in. We have the Maine Climate Council that has, I'd say, a fair number of the same topics, but more broadly envisioned goals. Specifically, there's a community resilience working group, which Judy and Andy have both been involved in the leadership of. We have the Governor's Infrastructure Implementation Committee, which you may have never heard of, but it was created by executive order around the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the White House wanted every state to create sort of a body to help go after federal funds and manage them and coordinate them across agencies. So we have that group. That group, actually, Dan has done a lot of the heavy lifting on the staff side of that, and it now continues to kind of oversee the challenges and the opportunities we have with a variety of federal funding programs for infrastructure. So that's another totally only on the state side. It's, I would say, interagency coordination. We have the new State Resilience Office, which you've all heard a lot about. It's going to be a 4-person office that is funded by NOAA at MOCA. But that's embedded within a new state office. And so the last question, is there a IRRC, which is what you all are? That's the acronym for what you all are, successor. So there are some existing groups. They have outside engagement, at least the first one does, but none of it is the perfect fit for how to think about the specific issues that we've talked about and their ongoing management. I think from a staff side, like there's not endless capacity to manage a lot more councils or commissions, but simultaneously, there's a lot of shifting landscape on these issues. And so, I mean, Joyce just said even time limited. I mean, anything that we would continue, as Jack just said, would need a specific sort of mandate from the governor. What are we trying to do? But I think what we're here to talk about is kind of what is next? Who does determine how we implement this plan? There is some heavy lifting politically. There's probably some shifting of federal funding, or there absolutely will be shifting of federal funding that we'll have to think about recommendations for. And state agencies could do that, but it's been very helpful to have kind of a more collaborative group. So that's, I just wanted to lay out all the
Yeah, no, I
ways
appreciate
that we've
that.
talked about it.
I totally appreciate that. I mean, because the issue of accountability, like who's holding anybody accountable across agency for these broad, you know, these resilience goals, I think is a really great question. And you know, Judy and Anne, I was going to ask you too, since you're on the community resilience work group and have done leadership there. I mean, is this something that you see as a good fit for that group?
Well, I'm not sure what the this is, because I think there could be several thises that come out of our recommendations, but it does occur to me that this report will come out, I think, the week before we meet. And by statute, we being the Community Resilience Working Group, not the workbook, that's a different thing. We're meeting, I think, the week after this report comes out, and we chose to do that so that we knew what the results were. Or is it a week before?
I think it's before.
It's a week before, you're right, it's a week before, but it's close enough, right? We're gonna have a pretty good sense of what these recommendations are. And so the question that I have really for this whole group is there a charge that we can then take up as a working group that we could then discuss with our working group? Because they're gonna weigh in too, but there does seem to be an obvious fit there. Not that we're gonna do it all, but what particular this would we do?
Judy, remind me who's on the working group?
It is, like all of the working groups of the Climate Council, it's a mix of legislative representatives, academic, I can certainly provide you with the list, academic, nonprofit, non-governmental, regional councils, state agencies, Maine Sea Grant. Pete, you're on it. It's pretty science-y, I would say, though it's also Jessica Brunicini at the Wells Reserve. She's on it. Her particular area of expertise is in the whole voluntary relocation space. So I can get you the list, but it's a broad cross
And
section.
you have municipalities.
And municipalities.
I mean,
And emergency management folks.
you don't have, and public health. I mean, the group has sort of
Yes.
focused on communities and how you support community climate planning, response work. You've had public health, mental health. I mean, you do have quite a few things under your charge.
Yes, it's actually, we used to have a really long name because of that.
But you have the same kind of mix that this group does, essentially.
You don't have the probably you don't have as much infrastructure expertise, I would say.
Yeah, or there's more public health, mental health folks too
We're on the
on that
community.
group. Yeah, more municipal. Yeah.
And infrastructure.
I guess, or is the thought that we would take this report and this next steps and give it to a single entity? Like, are we looking for a home for, here, you take this and your group gets all of this that you didn't have any part in, but you're gonna go and implement it? Or are
that's
we
too much
looking
to ask.
at like breaking it apart and saying, you know, because I know at one point somebody suggested, you know, a next report about where this funding could come from. And maybe that's that second group up there. It has that piece and this group has a different piece, but do we need to look at it in that sense? Like, how can you divide up these tasks and then find a home for each of them? Or are we really just looking for one place to say?
Well,
And I think if it's one place, it's really hard to do that.
Yeah, I think that you've just summarized the problem well.
and I mean, I think what we're talking about here is that accountability word and tracking, right? Because I think if you look at the plan, right, it is dispersed, the actions and are dispersed amongst the different state agencies and amongst different entities, right? Private entities as well. So there is ownership, but where is the accountability that these things are getting done across the whole thing? Question, Pete.
One advantage of linking it to something with the climate council also is that that reconvenes every 4 years. Where while the process is basically ongoing, not every 4 years, but we pick up and do the scientific assessment and the climate council, all the working groups do its meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So there's accountability, long-term accountability that's established from that. That would carry over because this is going to continue in many cases to be a moving target. Whether it's permitting, whether it's funding, all that stuff, that's going to probably continue to morph over the years. So having it sit with an organization that, or well, a group that is already going to be meeting in the future, discuss other issues, but is already, mandated to be and provide a report every 4 years, bakes in the accountability that we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Joyce?
I wonder, in the climate council process, we had some cross-cutting groups that met on a regular basis. We had one on land use, for example, and I wonder if this should be a more cross-cutting group rather than assigned to one of the one of the subgroups, because I do think, there's the plan piece, but there's also the implementation piece. And I think it will involve some of those folks who do the implementation. And so maybe, there is a cross-cutting opportunity there. I'm looking at Sarah, rather than assign it to one committee or form a new committee. But, there's energy stuff, so, I mean, there are some other things here that we're talking about that I'm not sure is 100% fit for that group.
Transportation stuff.
Yeah, well, just saying.
Climate council is the resilience council. I'm just curious, given the C word.
Well, it's in the state statute. But
So I have a question, Hannah, or anyone, about the climate council. Who is ultimately responsible for implementing the actions of the climate council? I realize it has many different contributors and the working groups have many different voices, but it seems to me, being on the climate council, that it seems like the responsibility ends up lying with state government. Is that correct?
I will say the climate council was created in statute.
Yeah,
And it is, I think that our office is sort of assigned responsibility for managing the council. The council has to recommend strategies to meet the goals required in statute. DEP actually has ultimate responsibility for the emission reduction requirements, so they
Again,
have
also-
rulemaking authority they could use. But the plan is supposed to talk about things state government, communities, private sector, everyone could do. It doesn't compel everyone to do those things,
This
so.
feels more that way, this commission
Yeah.
to me does.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have responsibility. Others of us who are not in state government should take responsibility. So that's my only,
Yeah.
my sense of the climate council is that it's getting feedback from many different sectors, but it feels like the responsibility is lying with the all hands on deck that's part of the climate
Yeah.
council. That's just my perception.
And I will say, I mean, Linda said, could you change the name of the climate council? I mean, the one thing about this commission is we're dealing with all the same issues of the climate council in many ways, but it isn't the word climate. And so I do think thinking about the infrastructure sort of implementation planning, there's some benefit. But again, we definitely don't want more meetings, and it's, to some degree, it's a question of folks around this table. Like, we will do our best to try to coordinate this, work with other state agencies to coordinate this, but how do we, this accountability piece, and I think especially those of you who aren't in state government, like, how do you think about the need for either you or someone like you to be involved in an ongoing way with accountability and sort of support for these kind of recommendations?
Yeah, and I talked about this with the staff the other day, just as a municipal person, right? And because I have found that from a municipal perspective, to be very helpful to have municipal voices, Shiloh and myself here, talking directly with state agency commissioners and staff. And I said, if the will of the group is to continue as a new kind of task force for a time limited and mission-centered another period of a year or something, that I would certainly be willing to continue to participate, because I do feel like it's valuable and I feel like we've come up with some real results, and I want to see it work. So I think really what's on the table here before we need to make a recommendation in some ways to get this into the plan, right? So, we've got a couple of different options here, and let's just test the waters for consensus on these. We can move this into some form, not necessarily the community resilience work group, but in some form into the climate council. I didn't really hear a lot of appetite for moving into the infrastructure implementation committee, but I think that's because nobody knows what it is or who it is, or, and
Yeah. I mean, I was telling you more that group exists. Some part of me turned to Dan. I'm like, that's a group in state government that continues to work, but it could be refreshed and made into a new thing that included, I mean, it is basically DOT, MEMA, I mean, it's the same state agencies who build things, but it does not include anybody from the private. So we could give that a new restructure.
Restructure, refresh, because too many meetings for you guys, okay? I mean, this is what I don't want to do. I don't want to create additional redundancy for the state staff. Some of us are just participating here and nowhere else. You guys are having to go to all these meetings. So, so let's hear from you guys first, like, based on your work that you're already doing and with who you're working, what's your recommendation to us?
Well, I mean, just having participated in the Marine and Coastal and Marine Working Group, I thought this last round, one of the more interesting and productive was the cross-working group exchanges. And so I would vote for having some place that it resides in, but also parsing out the elements to the different working groups and allow the working groups to like bring it back together if that makes any sense. I mean, you don't want to lose it, but at the same time, I think the different working groups would chew on their parts.
You're talking about climate council working groups now.
Yeah.
Because we did have working groups here for the last, whatever, 6 weeks or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'm gonna back.
No, but you like that structure. I hear you, Carl. Yeah, Judy.
Going back to my question about what this is, in terms of if we're talking about a continuation of the work for implementation, it feels like there's more than one thing. And I wonder if we just look at it in terms of the three areas that are on page one. One being strengthen infrastructure, reduce risk, the other improve preparedness response, the other being the financial side of things. Because it's too much for one group to do, and that each one of those does call on interdisciplinary, interworking group. And sometimes in addition to the people who are on those climate council working groups, because first go around, we called on the expertise of people within state government and at the regional council level to help us with our recommendations. We called them subgroups because we were such a big group, we had 3 subgroups, and then we had 4 or 5 subgroups. And those people weren't even on the working group. Because I think that coming up with the implementation actions for each of these 3 areas will take more people than we have here, and people who are interested and have skills outside of state government especially. But
well, we have the
also
actions, right? I mean, we have a grid of actions and even a timeline. What I think we're really talking about kind of is accountability for those. So like not having to come up with them from scratch. Am I totally misunderstanding the question here? I don't think we have to continue to do the work of coming up with the actions, right? Because they're built into this.
Yeah, I'm talking about implementing the actions. Yeah, these working groups, which is becoming an overworked term, but that these were sub-working groups would be responsible for the implementation. Kind of like the way Charlie was talking about, someone who's really focused on the financing piece. I mean, the Community Resilience Work Group did have a whole set of recommendations The New England Environmental Finance Center was very involved in that work. There's work to be done there. And so focused efforts on implementation and action, I think come from what we came up with and what this report came up with.
Right, so we're hearing finance, we're hearing permits. Joyce?
I think that one of the things that went well in the last climate council is we did check ourselves and were accountable for the things that we said we were going to do, which was helpful. I still think a cross-cutting opportunity to do the same thing. You have people in different groups and others can be invited in, which we've done for some of those, the land use conversation, inviting other people in. And I think there's an opportunity for those of us who are assigned things to report out in that format and just say, this is what we've accomplished. These are the roadblocks we've run into. So there's an accountability through that process because resilience is one of the things that we've looked at in the Climate Council. And you've got people there, you can invite other people in to check yourself. So I think to me, you could use that and, have a once a year check-in or something. Doesn't have to be, because we all have these assignments, right? I don't know that it has to be a lot of ongoing meetings as much as, I know as an agency, if I have to come present something, I probably better be working on it for the most part. And that's been, I think, one of the things that's worked well at the Climate Council is they're asking us all the time, what have you guys done? Have you met the state? We've had milestones. So if we run it in that way, but part of the Climate Council is a cross-cutting issue, I think that format has worked well.
Great. I'm gonna go back to the GoPIF staff to try to wrap this part of the conversation up. So you're hearing the ideas here, leaning toward the Climate Council and putting it in there, and I agree.
Sarah's shaking her head though.
My only concern is that, sorry.
No, good, great.
The
That's what I was
Climate
asking.
Council is broadly responsible for emissions reductions and resilience in statute. And so it has a lot on its plate right now. And this is introducing a whole new body of work that the Climate Council was not a part of creating and saying, and now Climate Council, would you please track and make sure that somebody does all the things that we're recommending. So I just worry that it's coming in a little bit sideways onto a plate that is already tracking transportation, buildings, energy, right? Like there's just a lot. And what I have loved about this group is that the Climate Council report, based on the work of the working groups, did a really, I would call it the 30,000 foot level. And this group went really deep and said, this is how you implement those things. And these are the very specific actions. And I am worried that it's at two different levels of depth, but.
And I agree with Sarah in that I think that many of the strategies are part of our climate plan, but with a different flavor and at a different level. And I think, you keep asking us, but I kind of want to ask you, especially those of you who aren't on the Climate Council. I think what I could envision is some sort of, this would require the governor to agree like a ongoing or a sort of 2-year time limited, especially in the time of kind of upheaval, a group to help implement parts of this plan and not meet regularly, but maybe meet like quarterly on kind of tracking progress and delving into some of the specific areas. And this is where Brian, see like what kind of heart attack he's having down at that end of the table. I absolutely think the community resilience working group, the transportation working group, energy, we all have a lot of overlaps that we will actually we are doing work in these areas and monitoring work in these areas. I just think this is at a different flavor to it. So, and I think a new version of this group, if folks were interested, could help us to sort of Charlie's point of if the federal landscape is shifting and I think we can do a better job of building political support for new shifts in how the state might need to think about these issues. So, the more you bury things, the kind of Climate Council is excellent, but it's very broad and has a lot of different working groups under it. And I think this group could have a little bit more higher level attention to it if we're responding to some real-time changes in federal funding, emergency management, et cetera. So
Is what's needed an accountability body of reporting back on the work you've done, or is it support on implementation?
Good question. And how formal does that support need to be?
Right.
Because Ryan and I have been, we've assembled and are working with an inland flood mapping analysis working group. We've been working together since September. And it involves USGS, National Weather Service, NOAA, Army Corps, state government. And we're learning a lot, and we're really excited to see LD1 happen. And it's like everyone's motivated from their own interest in answering the question of inland flood modeling issues. So could that group that has kind of formed because this is important simply report to the body that we're talking about, whatever it turns into being, but it's not sort of formally appointed. I mean, we're kind of doing it anyway. And I don't know, I kind of think that some of the people involved in the financing might do that work anyway, somewhat less formally, and maybe report up to the body we're talking about. Does that make sense?
I mean, I'm definitely hearing that there have to be specific working groups. I mean, there has to be the permit group, there has to be a finance group, there probably has to be an infrastructure group. Those are kind of our three buckets, right? And then, yes, I mean, something that does not meet often because these guys have meetings coming out of their ears, you know? So I saw Charlie's hand up. Did I see your hand up? Yes. And then Joyce, and then we're gonna try to bring this plane down, okay?
Crash it. I do think that each of the areas identified in this requires its own shift towards tracking and accountability. Each has its own, and there are different sets of problems. Financing one is on longer term issues and more uncertainty. The permit one is dealing with a lot of existing organizations and processes. The vulnerability one, number one, item, track one, I'll talk about that in a minute, but because I think it can be defined. It can have a very specific tracking and accountability process. But I do think each needs its own group to work with, led by OPIF or another agency. I do not, I'll be agnostic on that question. But then with members from this group who want to stay involved and others as are needed. And each should have a specific set of tasks aiming towards a 6-month and a 1-year set of outcomes, whatever those are appropriate to that area. For the first group, which deals with identify, prioritize, and strengthen vulnerable infrastructure. So there are 4 activities listed here. Assess the vulnerability, develop a prioritization framework, develop a pipeline of infrastructure projects, and expand existing training. So I would flip the order of that a little bit. And I put assess the vulnerability. Well, I mean, that's a massive task, right? It's not going to get done in considering all of the infrastructure out there and all of the problems. It's not going to be done quickly or by one group. I believe it has to be done by a lot of groups working off of a known protocol for vulnerability assessment. It has to be an agreed upon way to do those assessments. And as somebody who's done 20 or so of these around the country, everyone is a little bit different, but everyone has elements in common to make it work. So the first thing I would do is set up a vulnerability assessment process, which is essentially how much risk are you willing to take? It's the simple version. Second is the prioritization framework, and that's primarily metrics on public health, life safety, and economic damages. How are we going to measure those things? And then what's the prioritization in those? But there's a first order task to develop metrics of those things. And then all of that comes together in what has to be a training program available to local, state and local people. How do we get the word out about how to do this and keep the workforce up to date? And so I would see those three tasks together, and I can't do it in my head right now, but I could set some very specific outcome goals over the course of a year where you got to the point where you had a training program up and running with a common vulnerability assessment and a set of priorities and metrics ready to go for anybody who needs it. Then out of that could come the pipeline. So I would move that one into the fourth position. And I don't have a specific recommendation on that other than to say, scour the woods, find the ones that are up there and put that in there as the short-term pipeline to get that going. But so that's an example of how we can take the activities that we've identified and we can turn that into a specific set of tasks with a specific set of outcomes and a schedule to do it, with a probably a GoPIF-led staffing, but help from others as needed.
Great example, Charlie. Thanks for detailing that. Seriously, you noticed that I didn't bring in the State Resilience Office because it would kind of be like bringing in the person that's not in the meeting and volunteering them. But I do want to say that there's allegedly, we're hoping that there are 4 staff people there, to Charlie's point of bringing in other people, because the GoPIF staff are going to very quickly, if not already, feel overwhelmed by the level of implementation here. So I just want to be careful for that. Joyce has the last comment on this, and then I'm going to try to get us to a consensus.
I'm feeling overwhelmed. This is but one issue in climate that we meet on, and I'm in lots of groups. Dan's smiling at me. I have one person that works for me that does climate, and I can't send her to a meeting like that. She's not a policy person, so it's me or the commissioner. And it's not being whiny, but maybe it is being whiny, but it's the pragmatic truth of our situation. We didn't hire up a lot of people because we were worried about having to let them go if things changed. I guess I'm asking, and GoPIF, you guys know, I mean, I'm often at crossroads with GoPIF scheduling over me with different meetings. And so there is a capacity issue, but it doesn't mean we don't care. It doesn't, I mean, I'm here, the commissioner comes, we're prioritizing this over other things we do. I'm chief engineer, I have other things I do. And I guess I ask us to really be thoughtful about meetings, because I also find myself, when the climate plan's going, these guys are working like mad. We are spending hours and hours and hours meeting and writing. So I just, I do feel a little overwhelmed by the conversation about more subgroups and more meetings. And if there's any way to try to consolidate it, because I think there is a burnout factor going on. So at least for me, I don't, maybe everyone else is fine, but.
I've been over here trying to figure out what to say eloquently. I'm in the same boat. I work for a 30-person agency on a good day. And when it comes to mitigation recovery, I'm your go-to person because my staff are full throttle with their day-to-day responsibilities. So I'm glad you said it. It doesn't mean I don't care. But I do have day-to-day responsibilities, particularly, with the changing atmosphere. Maybe we'll have to figure out, how to run state-run recovery, and that'll be a big ask. So I don't know how I can commit myself or my staff to more meetings at this point. Doesn't mean I don't care. I mean, we've been here for years having these conversations, but it is a capacity issue.
So here's one idea that I'm hearing. Rob, go ahead. Saw your hand up.
It's not directly related, but I just, I don't know where this fits in, but I'm almost going back to what Jack said earlier about, stakeholder input into regulatory reform and
Yeah.
permitting reform, if that's okay, and I don't want to derail the conversation.
Nope.
It occurred to me that, so part of a very small part of the $69 million NOAA grant, one of the initiatives that our climate change specialist at DEP is undertaking is developing a regulatory forum to look at kind of how the DEP rules specifically intersect with climate resilience. And so he just did an RFP for a facilitator to facilitate that group, which will include not only state agencies, but also outside, interested parties. And I think the idea is also to go out to communities and kind of hear feedback specifically in communities. And so that's kind of a multi-year project, but I just wanted to kind of flag that as something that is actually just now getting off the ground, that's going to be happening. And there will be a facilitator funded by the NOAA grant specifically for that activity to look at DEP regulations and climate resilience. And so that might be an opportunity to kind of, incorporate some of the, stakeholders and the regulated community that Jack was talking about earlier. So I just wanted to flag that.
Thanks. Yeah, so based on what I heard, and you guys can tell me I'm hearing wrong, I think obviously implementation needs to live in existing stuff, okay? Cannot be new, because that implementation is where the hours are, all right? Oversight is something different. Oversight for accountability is less hours, okay? So I think the staff has done a great job with the tasks, kind of saying where they should live in different places. And we shouldn't be thinking about duplicating that's where those things live. There are structures that do it. We have a couple of things like the permit group and finance that we have to think about, like how we structure those. What I will suggest, however, is that there be a smaller group than this, but the same mix of stakeholders. So philanthropy, private sector, local municipalities, state agency, a little smaller, that meets quarterly to just review the task list and to make sure that we're on track. And how do you all feel about that? Could we live with that? Could that be a go?
Yep. I mean, I would just say, and I think not getting into the weeds, using existing climate council groups for some of the, like, working waterfront. I mean, there are components where we can farm out, but this kind of smaller group meeting quarterly can sort of track progress.
And put it together and help communicate, okay? Because I think that the communication, and I want desperately to get there, because that's what actually matters a lot to me, is a big important part of this, because this doesn't exist unless we can communicate it to all the stakeholders and get it out into the world, okay? I mean, it's nice that it's state agency stuff, but there's a lot of state agency stuff that doesn't, yeah. So Noel, go ahead.
Just responding to your question, if you can live with this, I have a quick clarifying question. The work that we talked about doing at the local level with municipalities, helping them build capacity, where would that fall?
That is identified to happen at the local level or to build capacity for it? Where are you
To
asking?
build capacity for, yes. Because that was one of the things we talked about last time as well, saying that it could be a more effective, quicker, easier lift, or nothing's easy about it, but easier lift to kind of invest in that. Where would that kind of, that volume of work, where would that sit?
Well, I mean, I think some of it, I think it lives inside the state resilience office, and with the regional directors that are either been hired or being hired. Emily, yes, correct?
Yeah, probably the regional coordinators or the RPOs.
The RPOs, the regional coordinators. And I have actually even made a pitch for there being community resilience officers in shared communities that report to the RPOs, because I do think the idea of trickling that capacity downstream and not just keeping it all up here in, bureaucracy land is like really important, like putting boots on the ground. So I think that's an additional suggestion for implementation we can make, Noel. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, thank you.
Did you get this recommendation? Is it clear enough?
Just like a smaller group than this that meets quarterly or maybe semi-annually. But
That's not about implementation. The
it's about
implementation is all.
accountability that gets reported.
Joyce, do you feel safe leaving the room?
I do. We're gonna participate one way or the other. We're not gonna, drop the ball, so.
Oh, we're trying to mitigate it. We hear you about capacity, and we need our chief engineer.
I have another job.
Send the Deer Elk Causeway person. Okay, we're gonna move on. We only have 20 minutes left. Let me ask Brian and Hannah, in terms of input on performance measures, how much do we need this right now? I mean, could we talk about communications, or do we need to, I mean, is this something that you need to walk us through?
These are high-level performance metrics that we included in the plan. The last one there, the percent of communities with less than 15 years old, is the one that we added since the draft that you all saw. These could be it. There could be others around communications or specific kinds of infrastructure improvements. We could leave it at this. Staff could go back and think about it some more, but we have to bring it back to you all at some point. So I think it's up to the group to say, are you comfortable with it, leaving it at this, or would you want to see more?
And I do think, I mean, the Climate Council did a lot of this. I mean, these are things, there's a lot of like to-dos here in the plan that you just sort of check it off. We did this thing. These are more measures of kind of ongoing process and ongoing investment of funds, ongoing activities that we sort of achieve success, that communities have support for specific resilience activities. I think if we ended up with a group that met, on an ongoing basis to track, it would look at how is this going, and then maybe actually set goals. I mean, there's a few areas where we have goals, but we'd figure out, okay, here are the percentage of communities who have flood maps that are less than 15 years old. And in 2 years, we'd be like, oh, that number is really bad. We want to set a goal for it to be higher 5 years from now. So, I mean, you need a baseline. And again, we have baselines in some of these, but not all of these. So, I think you could look at these and say, yes, I like these. And we could put them in the plan in some way. And then this ongoing group would then use them as a tracking mechanism. There's something glaring that was missing. I mean, I think these aren't meant to be controversial. They're meant to be more like, what are some metrics you could set for how we're doing?
Yep, great. Thank you for pulling them together. Judy?
So I would just ask, the choice of 15 years old, when we did the flood disclosure law, we chose the requirement that the disclosure had to be made in towns that had maps post 2001, because that was when they shifted to digital. The vast majority of them shifted to digital. They were available online. So that would be 24 years ago. And so I don't know why you've chosen 15. And I wonder if Sue Baker might be helpful in identifying the appropriate year in terms of, when it's digital or something, because that seems arbitrary. I'm not sure how you came up with that one.
A good question. Thank you. Sam, I'm curious. Sorry,
I know this is detailed,
Yep.
but back to what I said before, the percentage of communities with capital resilience reserve accounts. I would.
Yep, good, really good point. Yeah, and yep, Carly.
I think these are good measures for where the process is now. I think that we should be clear to caution all of the groups that are working on the next phase that that they are free to add to, refine, improve these, that these should not be, and I don't think they should be the only, these are the only tick boxes we have to tick. Every group needs to develop its own metrics that are consistent with these, but also reflect the work that they are doing. And it should be clear that that's an expectation of the follow-on groups, in addition to this.
Yep. Great. Thanks. I was gonna ask Sam, I was curious, like, in terms of performance measures for a plan like this, when you look at those, do you think that those are effective? Or are there others that you, and your experience, have run across?
I'm struggling between these higher level, you know, you made an impact with the specific actions, you know, you did it. Because some of those actions, it's not just you did or you didn't. There's a degree of doing it that you might want to flesh out and have metrics for each one of those. So it could be a yes or no, it could be some scale, but every action, so you know you did it and can report out and dashboard it, I think deserves some kind of metric, as well as these higher level. I mean, you know, you could also say, are we experiencing less impact somehow? And, you know, if you're tracking your damages over time or your days that you're out of power, stuff like that, there's other higher level metrics. You may want to look at the Chesapeake Bay program. They do a really good job. They've got resources, but in the past, they've done a really good job of tracking the implementation of their plan in different ways. And then it's on their website and you can chart it, graphic. I mean, it might be overkill for this group, but they have really made a commitment to track themselves. And they use it to then articulate their plan, the success of their plan, and gain support for it over time.
Cool. That's a great recommendation. Thank you. We'll take a look at that.
So wouldn't both be needed, you know, so the low level
I think so.
and the.
That's what Charlie's saying too.
I wouldn't
Is,
make,
you
want to make
know,
more work for you guys, but I would have each action decide how you would measure its implementation. And it could be simple, check, we did that. And then also higher level, how much impact are you making at a more broader level like these? And put it all in a playbook that's then dashboarded on a website. Again, it's work, but because it's not just to say that, to know if you did the plan and then reflect on it, and maybe like Charlie said, you may want to change some of the goals and the metrics, but to communicate, it's a good way to communicate in a positive way to other stakeholders. I was thinking one, and maybe I'm ahead of myself, but one stakeholder that has never been present are private sector companies, large ones in Maine that rely on healthy communities and consumers, like Hannaford or banks. They could be really key allies and supporters. You know, that once the implementation group kicks underway, that could be a group, a stakeholder set to engage and help implement some of these things as well, particularly if the federal government disappears on us.
Or dependent on good power, you know.
Ella Bean, well, they're classic, but Hannaford, that is,
We're on the climate council, yeah.
No, they are on the climate council, yeah.
I mean, they could be resilience hubs, they could, yeah, their business model, they need people to be safe and getting to their stores.
Well, and cooler's going.
Yeah, I mean, parallel in Texas, in my opinion, eye candy on this committee in Houston, which is made up of all the big companies like Chevron, and they realize finally, they're like, well, they see the writing on the wall that states are gonna have to step up, and so is industry, and they realize that, oh, if, you know, yeah, my plan is protected, that's all oil and gas. And then Cisco is a huge food company, is how I kind of got the idea of Hannaford. But they realize, well, you know, my plant facility, my control room is protected, but if the person who flips the switches can't get to work or is gets killed in a storm, that's, they're thinking more community. And I think that's a trend that you guys could pick up on, particularly in, it's such a smaller set of characters here. We call up Hannaford and say, hey, we need your help. Or banks. Or, I don't know, Home Depots play big roles sometimes.
Great. All good ideas. Any other comments about performance measures and how we want to iterate those out in this report and plan? Everybody's getting towards 4 o'clock. Okay, we have 2 more things to do. I want to talk briefly about the communications and engagement, and then we have to have a conversation about like what the next step is. So please don't leave if you don't have to. So how do you all envision talking to your constituencies about this plan? Who are you talking to? Who are the audiences? Deborah, you're the one who asked me this earlier today. What's your thoughts on this?
I mean, I just think the broader the audience, the better. And, I just think the more that we can actually be and communicate that this is not only collaboration across state government, but it's a collaboration across sectors. And it would be great if it even included the private sector. But the other thing that I'm feeling right now, all of you are, but because of the climate we are in, and I don't mean climate change, I think we need to think about, does climate seem like a luxury? I know it's not, none of us here think it is, but as people are losing their jobs, as people are, people may feel like there's other more basic needs pain than, and so is climate really that important? I think it is, we all think it is, but I think we need to think about that. That if I've had people, it's one of our initiatives, but I've had people say to me, you're gonna really continue with that when, you got people who are like losing their jobs left and right and people are hungry and so.
Well, and that's why this is the infrastructure rebuilding and resilience, I mean, truthfully, I mean, I'm speaking from a municipal level, like our infrastructure getting destroyed and that story, that dramatic story of like, okay, then the community is just gone if we don't take action, right? If we don't put something in place. To me, that feels very like at the same level as people losing their jobs, but maybe people don't. I mean, I don't know.
I thought the LD1 press release was excellent. Really excellent, really brought it home.
Hopefully Jackie's out there listening.
Yeah, she's done a great job. Yeah, Emily.
I was just gonna say, they're interlinked. We did a social resilience project for the past 1.5 years in Lincoln County, looking at how storms have impacted more vulnerable populations. And it's not just those that are lower income, underhoused. We even heard from families who said the back-to-back storms where they had to keep restocking their fridge when eggs were at that point $4 a carton and milk. They used to think they could weather these storms and having to stop work because schools are closed because there's no power or the buses can't get the kids to school because the roads are closed so much that normally they didn't think that this was going to impact them. But when you had multiple storms like we did last winter, they felt the impact. And so I think it goes back, Linda, to your point from an hour ago where we say, how do we tell this story? And I think it's interwoven. We have to tell the story of how it's impacted. The impacts to infrastructure have impacted our social infrastructure and our way of life. And so I think there is a way to tell that story and paint that narrative that this is important to all of us as Mainers, not just that the water district needs to be moved or the sewage treatment plant needs to be moved or a revetment needs to be put back into place. But the reason why is so that we can continue to be a community and live and thrive in Maine.
Exactly. Thanks, Emily. Judy.
Watched a National Adaptation Forum webinar just this week on storytelling, the power of storytelling, and I'd be happy to share that link to the webinar with. It was very powerful. But I think that what we were talking about before, about bringing it to the actions and implications of individual people and having them tell their stories is one of the most powerful way to convey this message. And one of the things that one of the speakers said in this session, which I thought was really powerful, was that this isn't New England, it isn't the States. This is globally, people are saying, I've never seen anything like this before. That is the tagline that everyone's saying. And so I think that's a really clear message. The other thing I'll say is I'm giving the keynote at the Down East Fisheries Partnership convening on April 29th, I think it is. And the audience is municipalities, but mostly the service providers to those municipalities. And the focus that I'm going to take, that in speaking with, the conference organizers, is how to convey the agency that you can help communities have a sense that they have in the face of, it's never been anything like this before. We've never seen anything like this before. And so and by the way, GoPIF has been awesome in providing me with your great slides on multiple occasions when I've given these talks, and I'll be knocking on your door for some LD1 more recent slides, because we've got an incredibly great story to tell that people are not aware of. We've seen these slides 100 times, but people out, across the state have not. And I think there's a very powerful story to tell about what we're doing in the face of, we've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, that's a great focus. And I agree. The LD1 slides and stuff in particular, I mean, I had them at community meetings too, and people are like, oh, something's actually happening, right? Something's actually happening. And I really hear Emily too. And, I don't know, Shiloh, I don't want to speak for both of us, but from my perspective, I'm always having my selectmen in my head, my body of select people. And I'll tell you guys something. It's not just the storms, right? Because they can say, and we can say next, we just went through a whole nother winter without any storms, right? I don't have to worry about storms. Sea level rise for the coast, right? And just rising water in general, is huge. And it's happening whether there's a storm or not. It's not just the storm surge we're worried about. It's the overall sea level rise. That's what's going to cut our causeway off. That's what's going to, flood these various things, so I just think that there are ways to make this urgent that are not all like particular event related, because I think we have to be careful about that, because events come and go and they come and go from people's memories. But I think we have to be able to talk to our local selectmen, which are our local people in every community, because they're the ones who are going to make the decisions about, does this money do we go after this money? Do we go after this project? Do we work on this project? They're the ones, other than the state roads, they're the ones making those decisions, including bridges, so. So I think we have to be able to take this out, as Judy's saying, and maybe it's every one of us, maybe it's different people, whatever, but we're gonna need a deck and a set of stuff that we can mix up and match, and it's gotta be dramatic, and it's gotta be urgent, and it's gotta talk to the people on the ground, I think, and not just to the state agencies.
In a way.
And that includes nonprofits and includes donors. And so, you talk in a little bit different way to each group. It's depending on who your audience is. But we need to talk to all these audiences about this. I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'm sorry, I interrupted. I said in a way that shows they have some agency.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for putting that in there. Yep. Any disagreement with that? Any other thoughts on that? Okay, we're having serious attrition here and we're at 4 minutes to 4. So here's the question on the table. We have had really meaningful discussions today with a lot of content. So the next step, with this input that we've had for the staff, are we comfortable with the way they're going to shape it and turn it into our final product? So that we would basically get an email a week or 10 days from now trying to cut you guys a little slack. It's because Brian was giving the laser eyes to us before when we were talking about this, like, dude. You know, getting that email and saying, yes, this draft represents what we've talked about. I have no disagreements with this. We can release this in May. Or do we need to have a more substantial, do we need to have another meeting?
Who wants another meeting?
See, that's the punishment part. See, it's like either this or this, people. Come on now. But there was a lot of stuff today. A lot of stuff, a lot of really great stuff.
And just to that, so Linda, we're gonna take your suggestions. And I don't think there was any disagreement with suggestions, but some of them require shaping. Come up with a new draft, as you said, email it out, and then you'll have a couple of days to say, I'm good with it, I can live with it. Because this is a draft we try to release as a agreement of every member of the commission. If there's something you couldn't live with, you need to tell Linda or Dan or us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you get this in your email box, you don't lose it, you pay attention to it, and 48 hours later, you're in communication with Dan and myself and the team to say yes, or still needs this couple of things. I disagree with this. Does that make sense? Does that work? What are you saying, Deborah?
48 hours, as long as I know it's coming.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Just very quickly, and I think part of that is, just to help set the context for everyone. Maybe we're just saying, and you mentioned this already, Linda, and I want to reemphasize that. Can you live with it? If there's something that you just simply cannot live with, then that could be something we could bring up. But if you agreed on that, I think it'll make things a lot smoother since we're running out of time.
Yeah, very good point, Noel. Thank you. How do people feel about that process? If you feel good about it, stand up and get ready to leave.
Excellent.
Doing a temperature check, everybody's packing their stuff up. Okay, so yes, Shiloh.
Just to go back to what you were just talking about before, about like the speaking to people, talking to people about it. When we roll this out, I mean, if this is our last kind of meeting, it's getting rolled out, is there something after? Like, will there be like a slide deck or a talking point or something that, we can each use to go to our individual groups or to tag each other and say, hey, will you come with me to a meeting and, help me present on this?
Yeah, and actually that's
Envision that.
I think that's it. We talked about it a couple meetings ago, but I think that's very well said or asked in that this May 7th date we envision as like here you go, governor, probably with the press there. So that's like a big public rollout. And then following that, I think we'll have slide decks, we'll have the report itself, we'll have summaries of the report, and we would love, maybe you can say this when you agree to the plan, I'd love to help you present this to MMA, or I want to present this to my select board or my board or AGC or whoever. I mean, that's where I think we're hoping all of you help us get this out beyond just the governor and legislature and the people who see a quick news story. So I think that is the ask of all of you. And again, we will definitely have the whole report. We'll have slide decks. We're happy to send you printed whatever you think is best, but your help would be great.
So I think it needs to be, because the state agencies
absolutely.
tooting their own horn goes nowhere.
Yeah.
But if it's coming from everybody that's been involved, that has those stories that go with all of this.
That's totally right. And we really need to think about the regions, and how we make sure we hit every region. So we do have a meeting, May 7th. This is not the last meeting. There is a meeting. And we hope that you'll all be here for the release, right? So that you're all here for the press and the public and for those next steps so that we get who's going to do what out there and spread the good word.
And
Proselytize.
I will say it says TBD because it will be some sort of handoff to the governor, which could be, remember we did the thing in Hallowell before, which we then went to a meeting. We're thinking probably more like a event. So it could be in the State House, it could be out in the world. We want a place in which the press will pay attention to us. So suggestions always welcome.
All right, wonderful work, everybody. Thank you
Thank
so,
you.
so much. Really, really great conversations today. Great ideas. Thank you.
Couple of things.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. I will cross Brian.
Oh, yeah.